Here begins disc number 1 in the videotaped deposition of Sylvia Edelstein, MD, in the matter of Monica Camello et al. Versus Melissa Longley et al. In the Circuit Court for Montgomery County, Maryland. Case number 442210-V. Today's date is January 10th, 2019. The time on the video monitor is 10:16. The videographer today is Dustin Thomason, representing Planet Depos. This video deposition is taking place at 451 Hungerford Drive, Rockville, Maryland. Would counsel please voice identify themselves and state whom they represent?
Justin Zuber on behalf of the plaintiff, Monica Camillo.
Lauren Waldrop on behalf of Gisela Valderrama.
Kathleen Bartley on behalf of Dr. Nuchal, Dr. Martin, and MEP Health.
Ben Vaughn on behalf of Shady Grove Adventist Hospital.
Mike Fonazowski on behalf of the witness. And
Michael Rubin on behalf of defendants Dr. Wiseman, Ms. Longley, and International Pediatrics.
The court reporter today is Jackie Jarbo, representing Planet Depos. Would the reporter please swear in the witness?
Doctor, please raise your right hand and be sworn. Do you solemnly swear or affirm, under penalties of perjury, that the testimony about to give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, doctor. As I just indicated, my name is Justin Zuber, and I'm going to be taking your deposition here today. Have you ever had your deposition taken before?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Have you ever been involved in any sort of medical legal case as an expert?
Yes,
Okay.
I have.
Can you tell me when that was?
That was last year. It was the death penalty trial.
Okay. And that was the only time that you've been involved in a case as an expert?
Yes.
Okay. And you said death penalty trial. Now that's not medical malpractice, right? That's something different.
Right.
Okay. All right, doctor, I have a copy of your CV, which has been marked as exhibit number 1. Is that an updated and accurate copy of your CV?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right, so on your CV it has you listed as board certified in, it looks like pediatric neurology and epilepsy, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, you have no other board certifications other than that?
Right.
On your CV, it does not have listed any sort of publications. Do you have any publications?
No.
Have you given any seminars?
A long time ago.
Okay.
Like when I was working at a hospital.
How many years ago do you think that was?
10.
Did those seminars have anything to do with headaches in pediatric patients?
It was most likely epilepsy. But I don't recall.
Do you keep a list of those seminars somewhere?
Somewhere, but not here.
Okay. If you could provide that list to your attorney so you could provide it to me, that'd be great. Have you at any point in time acted as an editor or contributor to any other publications such as textbooks or literature for medical schools?
No.
And doctor, where are you currently working?
I'm currently in private practice in Bethesda.
Okay. And what hospitals are you affiliated with?
I'm not affiliated anymore with any hospitals because the way things are done nowadays is different. We talk to hospitalists and we coordinate care with the people who are based at the hospital.
Okay. So you do not consult at any hospitals, is that correct?
Well, I talk to the hospitalist over the phone and we put together a plan. So the hospitalist could be a pediatrician receiving an instruction and a medical plan from me, or it could be a colleague like a children's hospital, and basically we share the information about the patient. I'm not necessarily have to tell them what to do because they have the same training I do, but we coordinate care that way.
Okay. But you're not actually seeing patients in the hospital on a regular basis, conducting rounds or anything of that nature, is that correct?
Exactly. That doesn't require that I go to the hospital in person.
Okay. And it looks like you did your fellowship at Children's National Medical Center, is that right?
That's correct.
Doctor, do you have the ability to read radiology films such as CT scans?
I have the training, but I have the education to interpret radiology studies, but I typically rely on the report and the assessments from neuroradiologists.
Okay. What kind of radiology films do you feel like you are able to actually read?
CT scans, MRIs, and all of the technical variants, head ultrasounds.
What about MRAs?
Yes,
CTAs?
it's not common.
But do you feel confident that you'd be able to read and interpret them?
I'm not sure. I think I would rely on the neuroradiologist.
Okay. Are there any neuroimaging studies that you feel like you would not be able to read and interpret besides what you had just mentioned about CTAs?
I can think of anything now.
Okay. Have you looked at any of the radiology studies that were performed on Johnathan Valadares at Children's National Medical Center?
No.
Do you intend to render any opinions in this case about any of the radiology studies that were performed on Johnathan Valadares in April of 2015 at Children's National Medical Center?
I think it's not the field of my expertise.
Okay. Do you intend to render any opinions in this case regarding standard of care?
She's not going to talk about the standard of care for anyone. If you ask her about her care on the day of issue, she's obviously going to say my care was appropriate, but not
She's
beyond
not
that.
commenting on anybody else.
Exactly
Okay.
right. Exactly.
All right. Do you intend to render any opinions in this case regarding the cause of Jonathan's death?
Don't intend to ask her any questions about that.
Okay. Do you intend to render any expert opinions in this case regarding whether or not Johnathan had any sort of bleed from an aneurysm in his brain?
If I intend to make an opinion on that,
Sure.
I know what happened, but I don't understand the question fully.
Yeah, I mean, other than what she concluded during her assessment of the patient on April 8th, she's not going to talk beyond that. She's
Okay.
not going to talk about the events of the 10th when the child's at the Children's National Medical Center, or for that matter, what was going on.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, and I just want to make sure, you don't have any opinion in this case regarding the timing of when the bleed may have occurred from the aneurysm, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Can we agree that Johnathan had a saccular aneurysm in his anterior communicating artery of the cerebellum?
At what point?
Uh,
Hold on a second.
I didn't have.
Hold on a second. At what point?
Can we agree that he had that as of the date that you saw him on April the 8th, 2015?
I have no way to know that.
Okay. Can we agree that he had that as of April the 10th, 2015, when he presented to Children's National Medical Center?
I have no way to know that.
She hasn't seen any of the subsequent medical records.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you're aware that there are records out there indicating that Johnathan had a saccular aneurysm in his anterior communicating artery of the cerebellum, is that correct?
I was informed that.
Okay. And who informed you of that?
I don't recall specifically.
Do you recall receiving any phone calls from healthcare providers at Children's National Medical Center?
I don't recall who I was talking to, but I learned somehow that what was the course of his medical situation.
Okay. So you're aware that someone had diagnosed him with that condition, but you don't know when he actually developed that aneurysm, is that correct?
When he developed that aneurysm?
Sure.
Well, that's a vague question. I mean, when did Johnathan develop that aneurysm? He was probably...
I want you to guess, and we don't want you to know. If you
Yeah.
don't have an opinion, you don't have an opinion.
I don't have an opinion on that.
Okay.
Could have
And-
been sitting in his head all of his life.
Okay. And it's certainly possible that he had that aneurysm when you saw him on April the 8th, 2015. Is that correct?
It's possible that anybody in this room has an aneurysm.
Okay. But is that a yes to that question?
Yes.
All right. Doctor, in your career, how many patients do you think you've seen, pediatric patients, with complaints of sudden severe headaches when they haven't had a history of headaches in the past?
That happens. That is the common presentation in my practice.
Okay. And when you have a patient like that, what is the trigger for ordering neuroimaging?
Well, hold on a second. Let me object. It's an incredibly broad question without any real underlying facts sort of associated with it. So I'm going to object. I think it's an unfair question. You can answer it if you can.
When I decide to proceed with requesting imaging, when I see a patient with a severe headache who never had a headache before,
Mm-hmm.
That decision will be based on extensive assessment of the situation, the medical history, the presentation, the past medical history, the family history, my examination. There's a big number of factors that will make me decide I need imaging right now, or this is not a case needing imaging.
Okay. And that's what this is what I wanted to kind of go through. So you had mentioned that the history is important. Is
Very.
that correct? Okay.
Very.
And that's the history that you would receive from the patient, right?
Patient and parents, because I deal with pediatric patients.
Okay. Is it important in a situation like that to also gather additional details from other healthcare providers that may have seen the patient?
It could happen that a patient comes to my office bringing notes from other providers, but it's not that I'm going to call other providers at the moment. It's not a typical situation that I call other doctors to see what was their impression at the time.
Okay, so that's not something that you would routinely do, call the
Not
other
routinely.
providers. All right. Is there any other sources of history that you would look to in order to inform yourself in a situation like this?
Sometimes families come with copies of the ER visits or previous studies or previous evaluations. Not always.
Do you typically ask patients for those materials, or do you just receive it if they have it with them?
Sometimes happens that the families bring this information with them, and other times it gets faxed to my office by the referring doctors. Different situations.
I guess my question's a little bit different, though. Do you actually ask for that information when you see a patient with complaints like this?
It depends on the case. If I think that it could be important or relevant, I ask the families to provide it, or my assistants will call the other doctors and get it.
Can you give me an example? What kinds of things in your mind would make it important or relevant to ask for that?
Let me object. I think it's an unfair question, but go ahead and answer if you can, Doc.
Let's say I'm seeing a patient with epilepsy and the family mentions that he had a lesion surgically removed from the brain. So I want to know what type of lesion was that, and look at the imaging, because that will tell me the localization of the lesion, the nature, benign, malignant, and things like that. And that has an impact on my management of a patient with epilepsy.
And you had also mentioned the other important component would be to do your examination, correct?
Very important.
All right. And I'm assuming your examination consists of several things, such as a physical examination, neurological examination, is that right?
That's correct, and vital examination.
In your physical examination, what kinds of things would you typically be examining?
The first step is the vital signs. Tells me if the patient is physiologically stable. Mentation is very important. I establish a small conversation with the patient, no matter the age, and that helps me understand if they are oriented to place, if they answer and understand my questions, gives me information on cognition and mental status in general. Then the physical examination is a multi-system examination. I check the heart, the abdomen, the respirations, the lungs, and check the skin and thyroid. I have a system that I follow to be very thorough in my physical examination.
Does the focus of your physical examination change based upon the patient's complaints when they arrive at your office?
You could say that, but I typically perform a very thorough examination of the patients, and yes, I may focus on certain things according to the reason for the consultation. If the patient is covered by birthmarks, I will look for certain signs of a particular neurological disorder, in which I have to look at the eyes, or I have to look at problems in the bones and things like that.
Okay. And the neurological, is there anything else included in the physical examination that we haven't talked about?
No.
Okay.
I think
Neurological examination, what kinds of things would you be looking for in a patient with sudden severe headaches?
I'll object to the full note question. Go ahead.
I do a thorough neurological examination in all of my patients. If it's a patient with headaches, I will be very attentive to signs of, let's say, a brain tumor, because that's a diagnosis as rare and exceedingly rare as it is, I don't want to miss.
Anything else besides a brain tumor that you would be concerned about and wouldn't want to miss?
I'm going to object. She didn't say that. I think you misstated her testimony, but go ahead and answer.
Everything depends on the putting everything together and the assessment that I have in mind. But in a patient with a headache, I'm concerned about the possibility of not missing a lesion.
Okay. And is that because a lesion could be life-threatening?
Well, tumors are exceedingly rare, and they're almost never an emergency situation, but I don't want to miss that diagnosis.
Okay. You said not an emergency situation, but they could have life-threatening consequences for the patient. Is that correct?
You could say that, yeah.
Meningitis can also cause headaches, correct?
Yes,
And that could be life-threatening for a patient as well, correct?
that's correct.
Encephalitis, that could also be life-threatening for a patient as well, correct?
Yes,
And that could also cause headaches.
yes,
An intracranial bleed, that could cause headaches as well, correct?
yes,
And that could be life-threatening for a patient.
yes,
How about hydrocephalus? Could that be life-threatening?
yes,
And that could cause headaches as well, correct?
yes.
All right, so we went over the physical, we went over the neurological exam. Are there any particular tests that you typically do for a patient with sudden severe headaches in your neurological test or neurological exam?
Let me check the form. Go ahead and answer if you can.
I do a thorough neurological examination in every patient, and I don't think. Can you say your question again?
Let me ask the question this way. What is your full neurological exam comprised of?
Well, I have 5 steps. I assess mentation. I don't know if you want me to extend about every detail of my mentation examination, but basically, I said it before, I make sure that the patient is oriented, answers my questions, and interacts with me appropriately for age. Then I go into the motor examination, the cerebellar examination, the sensory examination.
Let's go through these. You told me a little bit about the mentation, but the motor examination, what does that consist of?
The assessment of muscle functioning, and I make sure that there's, I check muscle tone, reflexes, deep tendon reflexes, muscle strength, and I look for symmetry, because an asymmetry of the motor exam is a red flag for me. And I check the patient walking, hopping on one foot, and sitting from the, standing up from the sitting position, long list of things.
Okay. Does the motor examination also involve an examination of the patient's neck?
Yes.
And what do you do to examine the patient's neck?
I check the strength of the muscles in the neck, the same way I check the strength in arms and legs. And I make sure neck is supple, mobile in all directions, and put my hand in the forehead and make them push, put my hand in the back and make them push back. And I get an assessment of the strength of the muscle necks.
The
Neck muscles, I'm sorry.
Cerebellar exam, what is that comprised of?
Cerebellar examination is about coordination, dexterity. I check finger to nose, I check for tremors, I check for coordination, balance, equilibrium, patients hopping on one foot, tandem walking backwards. It's a long list of things.
Okay. The sensory examination, what is that comprised of?
The sensory examination is the subjective part of the neurological examination because I rely on the information provided by the patient. So I check the perception of light touch, sharp touch, vibration and temperature in both sides of the body, because I don't want to, if I find an asymmetry, that's a red flag for me.
And you said, I think there was one more that might have been missing. What's after the sensory examination?
I think that's it. There are
Okay.
4 steps.
I gotcha.
The 5th is the
All
physical
right.
exam.
So besides the history of the physical and the neurological examination, is there anything else that you typically would do for a patient with sudden severe headaches?
Again, I'll object to the form and the lack of hypothetical typical patient, but go ahead and answer if you can.
Can you repeat your question?
Sure. We were talking about the steps that you do when you have a patient with sudden severe headaches, and we talked about the history that you gather, your physical examination.
Past medical history, the history of the present complaint, the past medical history, which gives me a context of his medical problem. I ask about developmental history, which is also very important. I ask about family history, the social history of the child, and the physical examination.
And your neurological examination, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
physical examination
Alright.
encompassing everything, and ancillary studies if they're provided by the family, like previous imaging or any other laboratory studies.
All right. Any other categories of information besides that you gather?
Can think of now.
Okay. So I want to go to your note. I think you got that there in your file. All right. So you saw Johnathan for the first time for these headaches on April the 8th, 2015. Is that correct?
The one and only time.
Okay. And I know that you had seen him back in 2009,
That's right.
and that was for, looks like, behavioral problems.
Yeah.
Now, at that point when you saw him, would you agree with me that he didn't have any history of headaches? Is that correct?
I'll review my note, but I think that consultation was focused on his behavioral and learning and emotional problems.
Okay. But would you agree with me that you took a pretty comprehensive past medical history, though, when you saw him in 2009, including a family history? Is that correct?
I'm talking about
I always do, it's a routine for me.
Yeah. I'm just going to share with that note from back then, okay?
Sure. And I guess my question is very simple. There's nothing in that indicates that he has a history himself of headaches. Is that correct?
That is correct, but these consultations for learning and behavioral problems are very focused on that.
Would you also agree with me, though, that there's no mention of a family history of headaches?
I don't have the notes from Mom, the handwritten notes that we have for this consultation. So when I put together my report, because the pediatricians don't have time to read extensive notes, I go to the point. So it could have been in the handwritten notes by the mother, which are not here. Maybe they're not available anymore. But I don't have any reasons to say that there's a family history of Parkinson's or things that are not pertinent and what the pediatrician is expecting to read about.
All right. Have you looked through your file for any handwritten notes from back in 2009?
No. After this date, I transitioned into the electronic medical records, so everything was scanned, and but only my notes were scanned. The other records were not kept.
Okay. It's my understanding that at least that's not available anymore.
Right.
Based on what your counsel gave me.
Yeah,
Is that your understanding as well?
I guess, yes.
All right. Go to your. Let's go to the page which says Kids Neuro Medical Questionnaire. Now, one thing I didn't see in your chart is any sort of referral slip from International Pediatrics. Did you have that somewhere else?
No, it's not required
All right.
because some medical insurance companies require a referral page, and most of them don't. But 100% of my patients are referred by another physician.
Do you know what time of day you saw Johnathan and his mother on April the 8th, 2015?
I don't recall at all, but I should have records of that because I have to go on the computer and see what time he was scheduled.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of whether it was morning or afternoon?
No, not really.
All right. If you could look through your system to find out exactly what time you saw him and provide that to your attorney, that would be great, okay?
Okay, no problem.
I'm assuming you also have records for when Jonathan's mother scheduled the appointment to come in to see you, is that correct?
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure what happens at the front desk. When I start seeing my patients, they come into the room. I don't know if they made the appointment 1 week before, a month before, or the day before.
All right. But there might be records in your office that contain that information, correct?
Not necessarily. When
Okay.
did the mother make the appointment?
Right.
Not really.
Okay. If you could do me a favor and look through your system in your office to see if when the appointment was scheduled, if that's contained anywhere, and provide that to your attorney, I would appreciate that. So prior to seeing Johnathan on April the 8th, 2015, did you have any idea as to why he and his mom were there?
No.
So the first information you gathered is what's contained in this questionnaire, is that correct?
Yes. This is the form that the parents will fill while waiting to be seen.
All right. And is this the same questionnaire that you give to every patient that you see?
That's correct.
All right. Do you have any special questionnaires for patients who have complaints of headaches?
No.
Is there a reason why you don't have anything like that?
Not because this is a general questionnaire and I will narrow it according to the main concern, because if not, it would be up to the front desk assistant to judge why is the family there and provide a specific questionnaire. It doesn't make sense because I don't ask my front desk to take medical decisions.
Okay. So when Monica, Jonathan's mom, comes into the office, this is a questionnaire that the front desk gives her to fill out, correct?
Right. That's
All right.
correct.
And then do you then use this form to fill out your information from your examination of the patient?
When I start talking to the families, the parents, mother or father, and I start taking the history of the reason for the consultation, I add notes to complement that will help me put together my report later on.
All right. Do you write notes anywhere else other than on this form?
No, sir.
All right. So we have this form, and then after you write your notes in that form, then you produce, it looks like a typed written clinical report. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Is there anything else or any other place where you typically write notes for a patient other than on that questionnaire form and your typewritten clinical report?
No.
All right, so let's go to the medical questionnaire, and we're going to kind of walk through this step by step, but it's my understanding that the writing on the left side is Monica Camella's writing, is that correct?
Let me just object, because there's some of her writing that goes across to the right side.
I understand. All right. It's tedious, but we're going to walk through this, okay? It says the reason for the consultation, and it says migraine, is that correct?
And mom answers migraine.
Okay. And that she's predominantly a Spanish speaker, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. Did you communicate with her in Spanish?
that's correct.
And you speak fluent Spanish? What
Yes.
about Johnathan?
I don't recall. Sometimes children are bilingual, sometimes they don't master the parents' language, but I don't recall the specifics here.
Okay. Was it your understanding that the mom was the one that filled out this form and not Johnathan?
Oh, that's for sure, yes. Children typically don't do it, the parents do it.
The only
Plus,
reason.
if you see the handwriting is similar in the demographics and the mother signs and everything, and I clarify that it's the mother signing, and so there's no reason to think that Johnathan did any of the writing here.
I see. Do you, and I'm assuming you don't have any particular questionnaire that's for Johnathan, is that correct?
No. I don't have particular questions for the children. The parents are the ones who provide information.
When you conduct your examination of the children, do you ask them questions?
Depending on the age. If it's a toddler, I interact appropriately with a toddler, but if it's a 12-year-old, I probably can ask a lot of questions. And if it's a headache problem, I ask them a lot of questions too, because
Okay.
they may know better than the parents about certain details.
Do you remember what questions you asked Johnathan about his headaches?
I don't recall the specifics of the interaction at the time.
The information that you would gather from asking Johnathan headaches, is that something you would write down in your chart?
If it's pertinent, yes.
Okay. Do you remember any of the information you gathered from him being pertinent to your assessment?
Well, I mentioned in my report that his mentation is intact, so that means that I was able to ask him questions and he was not confused or disoriented or answering things that are not appropriate.
Are you able to tell me what information in this report is information that came from responses Johnathan gave you to the questions you asked?
I think that it's most likely information coming from mom, and Johnathan could have added something, but I have the feeling that it was probably coming from the mother.
Okay. So am I correct in saying though that you can't really point to any of the information in this chart and say that's information that came from Johnathan?
In this case, probably not, probably mom.
Okay. So mom writes down that he's there because he has migraines.
A migraine. Mhm.
Right. What is your understanding, or what was your understanding at that point as to where that diagnosis came from?
It's a common diagnosis, and a lot of people walk around saying I have migraines, or my kid has migraines. So it's
Okay.
not surprising for me. I don't assume that the patient was told that by another doctor, because I don't know. One thing is to give a complex diagnosis, and another thing is if the family, the parents or the child says I have migraines.
Okay, so a lot of people say they have migraines,
Yeah.
but you didn't, did you ask whether or not another healthcare provider had diagnosed her or diagnosed Johnathan with migraines?
I don't recall the specifics of my interaction at the time, but I don't think that I would typically ask that question. I will make sure that I confirm that it's a migraine problem based on my fund of knowledge. So for me, it's irrelevant if another doctor or neighbor told them that it's a migraine.
Okay. The fact that Johnathan may have seen other healthcare providers that may have diagnosed him with migraines, that's not important to your assessment as to whether or not he's having migraines, is that correct?
It's part of the medical history, and it was clearly provided by the mother, because I wrote, this is my handwriting, seen at Shady Grove Hospital emergency room with a severe headache with vomiting. And that's what the mother tells me.
All right, so you're reading the writing that's immediately to the right of
Yeah.
where it says migraine?
Yeah.
All right.
So
And-
I'm informed that he was seen at the emergency room before.
All right. Was it your understanding that the emergency room diagnosed him with migraines?
Objection.
Again, migraine is a very common diagnosis, and it's the most common thing for me that, you know, even a 12-year-old can say, I have migraines. And a lot of adults say, I have migraines, and they didn't see a neurologist ever. So the fact that he was seen at an emergency room doesn't make me think that they were the ones making the diagnosis.
Okay.
It's not like the way my thinking works.
Have you read any of the depositions in this case?
No.
Is it uncommon for you to see a patient where the emergency room diagnosed the patient with migraines for the first time?
Is it common or uncommon? What did you ask?
Is it uncommon?
For the first time?
For the first time.
I won't object to the form of the question. Go ahead.
I'll object as well.
I don't care what the emergency room diagnosis is. I just make my own assessment, and what's helpful for me was what was done at the emergency room, and but I make my own assessment of the situation.
Okay. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. What was done at the emergency room is important to your assessment, but their diagnosis isn't necessarily important to your assessment. Is that correct?
I absorb every information available, but I make my own assessment.
Okay. Is it important for you to know what the emergency room found when they examined Johnathan earlier in time?
Sometimes I have the records, sometimes I don't have any records. I have in this case, I have the mother telling me what happened.
Okay. But you would agree with me in this case, the mom's telling you that she took him to Shady Grove Hospital on 2 occasions, correct?
From my note, she didn't mention 2 occasions, she mentioned just 1.
Okay.
Because I documented that he was seen at Shady Grove Hospital ER, but I don't say twice, I say, just mention that 1 visit.
Would that have been important information for you to know that he had been there 2 times?
I often see patients with headaches who've been to the emergency room 6 times, and that depends on a number of things. Some parents they worry easily and they will go to the emergency room for anything, so the number of visits is just a piece of information for me, and I have to put it in context. There are parents who work all day and they go to the emergency room because the pediatrician's offices are closed at 6 o'clock, so it's not that I have a threshold that if it's more than 1 visit to the emergency room, it has to be serious. I have to put everything in context.
And I'm not asking that. I'm just asking whether multiple visits to the emergency room for a sudden severe headache, like the one Johnathan was complaining about, whether that would have been important to you.
She just answered that question.
I
She
think
answered
I
that
answered
exact
the
question. Yeah.
And because it's not uncommon that I see patients with severe headaches who've been seen in the emergency room more than once. It happens to me all the time,
So it's just 1 piece of information.
that I have
Yeah.
to put in context.
If you go to your typewritten note, which I think is in there somewhere, the 3rd paragraph seems to indicate that you were aware that he was there 2 times. Is that correct?
Say it again?
If you read the 3rd paragraph, does
Yeah.
that indicate that you were aware that Johnathan had been to Shady Grove Hospital 2 times in the past week?
Yeah, that's right. Brought him again to the emergency room. That shows that sometimes when I put together my report, I recall other things that maybe I didn't write in my handwriting.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm understanding your handwriting, so if we can just go back to that questionnaire real quick. It says, and I'm starting at the very top, seen at SG, and next to it, it looks like you have admitted to but crossed out. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you know why you crossed that out?
Sometimes the parents confuse the medical terms for being seen or admitted to the hospital. So some parent could say, my child was admitted to the hospital, and need to, an admission to the hospital is a significant piece of information for me. So I said, how many days? And then they correct themselves. Oh, no, we were seen at the emergency room. Because for a lay person entering the hospital, they sometimes don't tell they will not see the difference between being admitted or being seen at the emergency room.
It then says Shady Grove Hospital, and you have something else crossed out there.
Visit, year visit.
Okay.
That's when I clarified for myself that it was not an admission, it was a visit.
I see. And then it says severe headache, is that correct? Plus emesis?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And is that an equal sign?
You have to say yes for the code.
Yes.
I'm sorry, we're kind of talking over each other, right? And then it also has no CT, is that correct?
Right.
Okay, why did you write that down?
Because I always ask the families what was done at the emergency room or at the hospital. Labs, head CT, other interventions.
But is there a reason why you'd want to know that information?
It's just part of my history taking to acquire information.
For a patient who has by the way, can we agree that Johnathan developed a sudden severe headache around April the 1st or March 31st, 2015?
Object to the form of the question, go ahead.
At the time I'm encountering this family for the first time. Let's forget the previous evaluation, which is irrelevant here. But I'm encountering this family, and I'm taking the history. So I'm learning about his headaches.
Okay. If you go to your typewritten note, very first sentence, it said, "Today I had the pleasure of seeing patient Johnathan in my neurology office for concerns regarding the recent onset of severe headache."
Okay.
So you would agree with me that he's there to see you because he had a recent severe headache?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So, why would it be important to ask Johnathan and his mother whether or not he had any neuroimaging studies done when he came to see you as a pediatric neurologist several days later?
I'm going to object. She's already answered that question. Do it one more time. Go ahead.
Because if, let's say, imaging was completed at the emergency room, I'll have an interest in looking at it.
Okay. Does that have any bearing on whether or not you might feel the need to order further imaging?
I don't understand your question. I mean, say that again?
Sure. The fact that he did not have a CT scan done, does that impact your decision whether or not you need to order any neuroimaging for him?
At that time, it's just a piece of information. Imaging was not done, and I have to continue my process of putting together all the information.
Is there a reason why you specifically wrote no CT?
Just documenting that the mother is telling me that the imaging was not done.
Why didn't you write no MRI?
I wrote no imaging. And in my handwritten notes, no CT, because in the emergency room, CT is the imaging of choice. They're not going to do an MRI.
In CT, in the emergency room, is the imaging of choice for patients with severe headaches, is that correct?
It's the imaging of choice because
Hold on a
it's...
second. You've got to be careful with how we ask these questions, okay? I want you to take your time, listen to his question. I'm going to object to the form of the question and the implication that a CT scan should have been done in the ER. That's what it sounds to me like your question is trying to direct to. So I'm going to object to the form of the question, and specifically object if you're trying to elicit a standard of care opinion about what should have been done in the ER.
I'm
You can
not-
go ahead and answer if you can.
Do you need me to rephrase the question?
I think you asked why the head CT is or a CT scan is the study of choice in the emergency room.
Mhm.
Nothing to do with this case.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's rapid and MRI takes longer than an hour, and if you need a rapid diagnosis. So in a patient who arrives to the emergency room and needs imaging is going to get a head CT.
Let me phrase it this way. Is a CT scan typically the study that is ordered for a patient who is presenting with a recent onset of a severe headache?
No.
Objection. Join.
No.
Okay, what test is typically ordered in a situation like that if it's felt to be warranted?
Well, that's the whole issue. So what type of patient? Your hypothetical question doesn't provide any information with the type of the patient, so I'm going to object. If you can answer that somehow, go ahead, but I don't want you guessing.
It's not my position to talk about what the emergency room doctor is supposed to do, but I would say that he conducts his evaluations the same way I do. They put together a number of factors, presentation, medical history, examination, and then they will decide what's appropriate or not.
Moving along here, it says that Johnathan had, I'm trying to read your handwriting, had another, is that episode?
Had another episode in December.
Okay. And the mom wrote next to that, when did the problem start? She said December, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what does it say after that?
Nothing until then. Like the mother is telling me that before December, he didn't have problems with headaches, with severe headaches.
Okay.
So it sounds to me that mom is telling me he has a severe headache now. He had a severe headache in December, but not a particularly severe headache before December.
Was it your understanding that Johnathan had any headaches prior to December?
The mother is telling me not a severe headache before December.
Okay. Did you ask either Johnathan or his mother whether or not he was having headaches prior to December?
Well, that's part of the review of systems in the questionnaire, and that was circled by the mother. The 4 circles that you see, they're the mother. And she's saying that headaches are an ongoing problem for this child.
I'm seeing the review of systems. I'm not seeing where it says headaches are an ongoing problem for the
She
child.
circled headaches.
Okay, but how does that tell you how long the headaches have been going on for?
This is something I would ask the family at the moment to get more details. But the review of systems, and my assistant explains the families how to fill this. She clarifies, not everything, but she clarifies that the review of systems is not about the reason for the consultation that day, but problems that are ongoing or happening for the child.
All right. Did you ask the question how long Johnathan's headaches were going on for prior to December?
I probably did ask that, it's just that I don't recall the specific interaction at the time.
Okay. Would that have been important information for you to know?
Yes.
And do you see that documented anywhere in your medical chart?
No.
And then between December 2014 and March 31st, 2015, was it your understanding that Johnathan was having headaches during that period of time?
Yes.
And where is it in the medical chart where it says that that was happening?
That would be based on the fact that mom circles headaches in the review of systems, telling me that it's an ongoing issue, the same way she circles hyperactivity, and this was a child with ADHD and school difficulties.
Okay. But where does it say in the medical chart that Johnathan was having headaches between December 2014 and March 31st, 2015?
She just told you. She just answered that exact question. She's not going to do it again. She just answered your question. The
Okay.
exact same question.
Would you agree with me that it doesn't say anywhere in the medical chart that he was having headaches between that period of time? At least nothing written by the mom?
I mean, those exact words?
Yes.
Okay.
The parents will not write absolutely everything, the same way as my reports will not spell everything that I heard in the interaction. I have to make a summary. Sometimes I have to force myself to make a summary because the pediatrician needs to get the bullet and what is the diagnosis, what is the assessment, and what is the plan from there. No pediatrician is going to read a 6 pages report. They don't have the patience or the time for that, and we need to communicate in a certain way.
Did you write down anywhere in the medical chart anything identifying the nature or quality of the headaches that Johnathan was having between December 2014 and March 31st, 2015?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
Because the point is the assessment of that episode that day at my office. put that episode in a context and identify the nature of that episode. So there are a lot of details that are not there that help me arrive to a diagnosis.
How often was Johnathan having headaches between December 2014 and March 31st, 2015?
I don't recall.
Do you know how many times a month he was having headaches between December 2014 and March 31st, 2015?
I don't recall.
Do you know how intense his pain was when he was having headaches between December 2014 and March 31st, 2015?
I don't remember.
Do you know the location in his head when he was having those headaches between December 2014 and March 31st, 2015?
I don't remember.
Do you know whether the location of the pain he was having in his head was any different between December 2014 and March 31st, 2015 compared to when he saw you on April the 8th, 2015?
I don't remember, but migraines have shifting locations that are typical for that. Could be one side of the head, the other, the back, the front, all over.
Assuming that were true, wouldn't it be important for you in your assessment to ask him whether the location of the pain had changed at any point when he had these prior episodes compared to when you were seeing him on April the 8th, 2015?
I would say that I asked that kind of question. That's important to me, particularly for the concern about the remote possibility of a brain tumor, because the pain is localized in the same place all the time. So I know I ask the location of pain. Not everything goes in my report, but I do ask that.
Okay, so you believe that you asked it, but you would agree with me that that information is not contained in your report?
Okay, yes.
The pain that Johnathan, you had said that tumors typically have pain usually always in one location. What location is that?
Depends on the location of the tumor, but it's consistent. If the tumor is located on the right side, the child is not going to have a shifting pain one time on the left, one time on the right.
Are headaches in the occipital region of the head, are those concerning for a pediatric neurologist?
Not particularly.
Are those uncommon in pediatric patients?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Are headaches in the occipital region of the head, are those uncommon in pediatric patients?
It can be as common as any location.
Okay, so your understanding is that headaches in the occipital area of the head are as common as headaches in other regions of the head in pediatric patients?
Object to the form. Go ahead.
It's a really broad and vague question, because a migraineur can have pain in any location, and the location can be shifting.
Set aside a migraine. Let's say you didn't have the history of migraine with Johnathan, and he just came to you with a sudden severe headache, and he was complaining about it in the occipital area of his head.
Yes.
Would it be concerning to you that he was complaining of a headache in that area?
I still have to get more information, because the occipital, the back of the head could be the location of pain in a migraine, in a concussion, in a brain tumor, and it's simplistic to think that if the patient comes in and has pain in the back of the head, I'm going to be particularly concerned. It doesn't work like that.
Is there anything more concerning to you about the fact that a patient is complaining of pain in that location?
No.
Okay, so the fact that he's got pain in the occipital area of his head, that's not something that is concerning to you.
Wait. Come on. Don't misstate what she said. She says it's concerning, but it's not concerning for one process more than the other. She has to ask for more information.
Yes.
So she's not going to answer that question, because I don't think you intended it, but that's a very unfair question. So ask the next one.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Given that he is complaining of a recent onset of a severe headache, and you had noted it looks like you wrote down back of head, which is the occipital area, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that he had been to the emergency room multiple times. Twice. And this had been going on for more than a week at this point, correct?
Onset of headache last week. Okay, a week.
Okay.
for this particular episode.
Sure. He's also complaining that he's dizzy, correct?
Yes.
He's also complaining of neck pain, correct?
This visit?
Neck
Oh,
pain?
come on, Jack, go ahead.
What is it?
Did the mom circle anything that indicates to you that he was having neck pain?
That's correct, but that's review of systems, so that could be part of an ongoing problem, not pertinent to this acute consultation, this acute visit.
Did you ask the mom whether he was currently having neck pain?
I don't recall the particulars of my conversation at the time.
Did you examine Jonathan's neck when you saw him?
It's part of my thorough examination.
Where does it say that you examined Jonathan's neck?
It doesn't say, but it doesn't say everything I do in my examination, not even in my neurological examination.
What is
For instance, I didn't document my sensory examination, and I always do it.
Okay, so you didn't document your sensory examination for Jonathan. Do you know why you
The
didn't do
moment,
that?
why? Because I'm dictating with a dictaphone in my hand, and sometimes I forget to mention something. But if it's a positive sign, something that was abnormal, I will not forget because it will be written or it will be in my memory.
What is nuchal rigidity?
When the neck doesn't move in all directions without pain, and or there's a limitation of motion.
And could it a positive finding of nuchal rigidity that could lead you to believe as a clinician that a patient may have meningeal signs, is that correct?
It's an abnormality. I would take it seriously.
Okay, because it could mean it could be something life-threatening for the patient, correct?
It's an abnormal sign.
Okay.
I'm not saying life-threatening, it's an abnormal sign. So when it's not documented, that means that an abnormal sign was not there.
Where do you have it written down in your assessment that you even checked for that?
That I
Yeah.
did check for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of my regular assessment. In fact, constitutional is where I would make note of rigid neck or something pertinent to the neck, and I put normal.
Which page are you on?
Second page of my handwritten note.
Okay, I'm seeing physical examination. And you see where it says category neck? I don't see anything written next to that, do you?
That means that I didn't find anything of concern.
Okay.
Because I didn't put anything in skin where I have to note, rashes or lesions or any problems. If I leave it blank, it's because I didn't see anything that will need to go into my report.
Would you agree with me that this doesn't identify what test you performed in order to check Jonathan's neck?
I think it does, because if I don't clarify an abnormality, it means that it was normal.
So the fact that you didn't write anything down there indicates that there is nothing abnormal, is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you typically write down if you check a patient for nuchal rigidity?
If I remember to mention that when I'm with my dictaphone in my hand, it will be in the report. To make it clear, in my report, I'm not going to forget to mention things that are abnormal, but I could forget things that were normal in the moment of a dictation.
Would you clarify it in your written report later on if you had forgotten something like that?
What do you call my written report this?
Your written clinical report.
Not necessarily. This goes from the dictation company to the pediatrician, and I don't necessarily have to do a correction if it's not needed.
No, I guess what I'm asking though is there ever a time where you may not have written it in your written report, but then it would have been added to your typewritten report?
I don't object to the form of the question. I'm confused at this point. You can answer it if you can.
When I'm putting together my dictated report, I am looking at my handwritten notes, but I'm also using my memory of the encounter. So there's going to be more information than what's written here, and certainly anything abnormal will be in my report, even if I forgot to handwrite it, because it will be in my memory.
Where does it say in your typewritten report that you checked Johnathan's neck for nuchal rigidity?
It's part of my physical examination.
Can you point to me where it says in your physical examination that you checked his neck for nuchal rigidity?
It's not there.
Can you point to me in your physical examination where you checked his neck at all?
Well, the fact that I didn't make note of anything abnormal is because I checked.
Okay. What is Koenig sign?
Say that again.
Koenig sign.
It's a sign pertinent to meningisms.
And what is meningisms?
Signs that, physical signs that are present when a patient has meningitis.
Okay, and that would include signs that often involve, I think, irritation of the meninges, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is that something that you checked on Johnathan when you examined him?
I would check that on any patient with a headache problem.
Did you perform the Koenig signs test?
I don't do that specifically. I just check for supple neck, a neck that is painless to all range of motion, and other signs of meningisms like sensitivity to light, and that basically. Would you agree with me that you don't write anywhere in the report that you performed Koenig signs test? Is that correct? Right.
What about?
It's not there, but again, I make a general description of my physical examination, and if there's anything abnormal, it will certainly be there.
What about Brzezinski's test? You know what that is?
Yes.
Okay. And what test is that?
Another exploration for meningisms.
Would you agree with me that there's nowhere in your medical chart that indicates that you performed that test as well? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And if either of those tests had come back positive, Koenig or Brzezinski's, that would have been something concerning for you in a patient with complaints such as Johnathan.
Yes.
Would that have prompted you to order imaging that would have been done that day?
I'll object to the form of the question into your hypothetical, if you can answer it.
I would have checked signs for meningisms in a patient presenting with a severe headache, even though I don't recall the specifics of my encounter with Johnathan and his mother in that room, but it would be an obligatory thing for me to check for meningisms, and if I find them, I will proceed with imaging. In fact, I will recommend an immediate visit to the emergency room for other things than imaging, including
Okay.
a lumbar puncture.
But you would agree with me that part of that would have been you would have wanted as a practitioner to have imaging done on Johnathan that day. Is that
I don't
correct?
understand your question.
So if he had positive signs for meningisms, would you have wanted him to have imaging done that day?
I'll object
He
again.
didn't have them.
I understand you believe he didn't have them, but if he did have them, would you have wanted him to have imaging done that day?
If you talk in general about any patient, I would have sent the patient to the emergency room.
Would you have taken any steps to explain to the emergency room why you were sending a patient there and that you wanted them to have imaging done?
If I send a patient to the emergency room from my office, I always communicate with the emergency room.
Okay. And as part of that communication for a patient who has meningisms and severe headache, abrupt onto severe headache, would you tell the emergency room that you want head imaging done?
Again,
I don't
object
have to
the
tell them.
hold on. I'll object to form and the foundation. I think it's an inappropriate question. Go ahead.
I don't have to tell an emergency room doctor what to do or how to conduct his medical management.
Okay. So I just want to be clear, in a situation like that, if you had found positive Koenig's or Brzezinski or nuchal rigidity, you would have sent him to the emergency room that day but you yourself wouldn't have ordered a CT scan or any other neuroimaging for him.
Same objection, form and foundation, go ahead.
I think it's more fair if you, instead of talking of Johnathan, talk in general, because this didn't happen in the assessment of Johnathan in particular. So if I have a patient in my office and I determine that there are meningisms present, I instruct the family to go to the emergency room immediately. I notify the emergency room that a patient of mine is on his way to the emergency room for this and that reason, and it's not my role to tell the emergency room doctor what to do next.
Okay. And that's what I'm getting at. It sounds like what you're telling me is you yourself in that situation wouldn't be the one to order neuroimaging. Is that correct?
If the patient is going to be seen in the emergency room doctor will do whatever they think is pertinent.
Okay. Let's say for some reason you can't get the patient to the emergency room. Would you order neuroimaging for that patient on that day?
All right,
A
so,
patient
hold
with
on. So, just so we have the hypothetical correct, you have a patient she sees in the office with evidence of meninges, which wasn't existed in this case. She tells the patient to go to the emergency room, and for some undisclosed reason, the patient can't go to the emergency room. And now the question is, would you do what?
Would you order neuroimaging that you wanted done that day?
Where?
If I believe
I would object to the question and the foundation for the question. You can go ahead and answer.
If I believe that the necessary care is the care in the emergency room, I don't understand your question of if they cannot go to the emergency room. If the decision is that they need to go to the emergency room, I don't understand what's the variant here.
Let me ask you this. In a patient with Johnathan's complaints and findings, what additional information would have prompted you to order neuroimaging that you felt that had to be done that day?
Objection to the hypothetical. If you can answer it, go ahead.
In the medical history taking process, there would have been different type of information than what I got. For instance, that this is a unique severe headache, that he never had headaches before, that it was a headache that was extremely severe and disabling, and that to the point that he couldn't even speak or do anything, and that there was absent family history for headaches, that his exam was not normal. That's an example.
When you say his exam was not normal, what does that include?
That I discovered a focality in his exam, in the exam of this particular patient, hypothetical patient, that I discovered a focality, that I discovered meningisms, that I discovered an impaired mentation.
Okay. So if you found that, that would have prompted you to order neuroimaging that day. Is that correct?
Again, I'm object to form and foundation. Go ahead.
It's a hypothetical case, but I think it's very likely that I would have done that.
Okay.
Most likely that I would have sent the patient to the emergency room right away.
Okay. So it would have been your preference to send the patient to the emergency room right away, but it sounds like it certainly would have been a possibility you would have ordered neuroimaging that day as well.
No, I'm not saying that. If I have concerns that the imaging is needed right away, the patient belongs to the emergency room. I'm not going to send a family to a neurology place where they're going to make an appointment or wait, 7 hours to get a study if I think that they need it right away.
Okay. So you rely upon, the emergency room has the ability to perform the test faster, correct, than if you sent them probably to a separate radiology clinic?
Right.
Okay. What emergency rooms are near your office?
7, 8, I don't know, I never counted them.
Okay. And you only have one office, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if you were to send Johnathan to an emergency room, do you know which emergency room you likely would have sent him to?
I'll tell the family to go to the emergency room. There's Sibley, Suburban, Shady Grove, Holy Cross, Adventist, Children's Hospital.
Do you know whether all of those emergency rooms have the ability to perform neuroimaging on an emergency basis?
Any emergency room can.
Do you know whether any of those emergency rooms have any limitations with the kind of neuroimaging they can perform?
I don't understand your question.
So for instance, some emergency rooms may not have the ability to perform advanced testing such as MRAs or CTAs.
I'm not gonna expand on what the emergency rooms can do or not, but the MRI is a study that a hospital can provide, but in an emergency situation, the CAT scan is rapid and can be completed in a few minutes. The emergency room doctor will judge what study is pertinent.
So you would agree with me a CAT scan can be performed in a few minutes?
The duration of a CAT scan is a few minutes.
Just want to make sure going down the right side of the page again, I just want to make sure I have the interpretation of your handwriting. It says no emesis now. Do you see that?
Give me 1 second. No emesis now.
Okay. Is that important to you at all that he had emesis and he still has the headache but he doesn't have emesis now?
Well, it tells me that, patient vomited when he was seen at the emergency room at Shady Grove, but then he stopped vomiting. So it's a sign of improvement, I would say.
Have you ever read any literature that indicates that when a patient had vomiting with a severe headache and then ceases to have vomiting but the headache still continues, that's concerning?
I'm going to object to the form of the
No.
question.
I'm not aware of that information.
Okay. You have down that he was dizzy. Is that information that you got from Johnathan or his mom?
I can't recall the specifics. A 12-year-old can say the word dizzy and or it could have been the mother. I'm not sure.
Do you know what he or his mom meant by dizzy? Was the room spinning? Was he losing balance?
It's a word that I always clarify because you're right. It means different things for different people. But I always say, what does it mean to be dizzy? And some people will say, well, it feels like I'm walking on a boat, or the room is spinning around me, or I'm about to vomit. So I always clarify. And if it goes into my report as dizzy, it's because it's true dizziness.
What does it mean to be true dizziness?
That it's like what people would describe as a feeling of being unstable, or that they're walking on a boat, that kids always say.
Okay, so by you writing it in the medical chart, it was your understanding that Johnathan felt like he was unstable?
That he was dizzy when he was having the headache.
Okay. Is it your understanding that Jonathan's headache had been pretty much continuous?
It says Johnathan has been with this headache since then, for the last 4 days, I clarify.
Okay. Is it your understanding that Johnathan had the headache only for the last 4 days?
I'm referring to the episode that prompted the consultation that day.
I guess that's what I'm asking you. There is notes that you have in your typewritten notes that he had been having the headaches going back approximately a week or more. What I'm trying to figure out is it your understanding that those were distinct episodes, or this was one continuous headache the entire period of time?
It could have been an episode that started a week prior and resolved, and then he started another headache for the last 4 days. I don't recall the specifics of the conversation. It would have been clear for me at the moment. I don't recall now the specifics. But Johnathan was having problems with a headache for the last week, we can say.
Did you ask Johnathan or his mother whether or not he was having a continuous headache during that period of time?
I probably did, but I don't recall the specifics of my conversation at this time.
Okay. Would you agree with me that that information's not contained in your medical word chart?
I'll object. Go ahead and answer.
You could say that it's not there, and it's there because it talks about a headache for the last 4 days, which started a week prior.
Okay. So when you write down the last 4 days, that was information that you remember or you believe came from Johnathan or his mother?
Probably his mother, but a 12-year-old can give input.
Okay. Did you ask Johnathan or his mother how many episodes he was having between March 31st and when they came to see you on April the 8th, 2015?
I don't recall the specific conversation, but from what I documented, it sounds like he develops a headache a week prior. It possibly got better, but then the headache returned, and it was there for the last 4 days, I wrote.
Would you agree with me that it doesn't say anywhere in your medical chart how often Johnathan was having the headaches between March 31st, 2015 and April the 8th, 2015?
She just answered that question.
No, this was a question about it not being in the medical chart.
She did, and she answered it, and she referred to her statement in the medical chart that says it's there for the last 4 days.
I want to know how many times he was having headaches. That's the question I'm asking you. Would you agree with me that the number of times he was having headaches during that period of time is not identified in your medical chart?
Well, maybe you could talk about 2 headaches. He develops a headache a week prior, the headache gets better, and then he develops another headache lasting 4 days, and that's when he arrived to my office.
Okay, so your understanding was 2 headaches.
I can't be sure because I don't recall the specifics of the conversation, but you could say that he had 2 headaches around that time.
Did you ask Johnathan or his mother anything about the difference between the headaches he had earlier in time, perhaps the first headache, compared to the one that you believe he had later in time?
I don't recall the specific of the conversation. I didn't make note of that.
Okay, so that's not in your medical chart.
No.
Would you agree with me that it doesn't identify in your medical chart whether the location of his headache had changed at any point between March 31st and when he may have had the second headache closer to when he saw you on April the 8th?
No, I think we're clear that I'm not writing a lot of specifics about, there's possible 2 headaches in terms of what's different between them.
Further up, it says for the mom to describe your concerns or observations, and she wrote down, and I don't speak Spanish, but I believe it says not sleeping and a lot of pain. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you ask Johnathan or his mother when the headache pain became so bad that he was unable to sleep?
I don't recall.
Would that have been important information for you to gather?
Well, it's a common occurrence that a person have a severe headache, a person has a severe headache that interferes with sleep.
Wouldn't it be important for you to know as a clinician whether the headache pain had become so bad now that he was unable to sleep compared to headaches he had had in the past?
I think that interference with sleep talks about the severity of the pain, and patients with migraines particularly can have severe migraines and they cannot fall asleep because of that.
I understand, but wouldn't it be important for you to know as a clinician that his headache pain had become so severe, different pain than what he had had in the past, now such that it was interfering with his sleep?
Let me object to the form and foundation for the question. I think she's answered it. Do it one last time, Doc.
When patients have migraines, every migraine can be different from one another. So sometimes it can be mild episodes, can be severe episodes, episodes in the evening interfering with the onset of sleep, episodes in the morning that interfere with school attendance. Every episode can be completely different than the other. So here he or the mother are giving specifics about this particular episode.
Let me ask you this. When you were collecting this information, At this particular point in time, you hadn't drawn the conclusion yet that Johnathan was having migraines, correct?
What's this particular point in time then?
When you were asking about his history.
When she just started taking history?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm taking the history and I try not to be biased and assume that this is a migraine because the mother says so.
Okay. So at this point, you've got a bunch of things that might be on the table for your consideration as to what might be causing his headaches, correct?
I'm not going through my diagnostic algorithm, I'm just taking information.
Okay. And in taking that information, not having any bias about whether or not he might be having a migraine, would it be important for you to know as a clinician whether his headache pain had become so severe that it was interfering with his sleep compared to any other headaches he may have had in the past?
Okay, I'll object. I think she just answered that question. Do it one more time and that's it, Doc.
In this particular episode, he's having sleep interference. That's all I can say. That's what I documented.
Okay.
Or the mother wrote.
What I'm trying to ask, though, is does that make a difference that he might be having it now but didn't have it in the past?
Are you asking her, is she making that assessment while she's taking the history, or
No,
after she's
I'm
done
asking
everything?
you. I'm asking you whether it's important for you to know that information, that the pain is so severe it's interfering with his sleep now compared to any headaches he's had in the past.
I'll object. I think she's answered it, but I think one last time just to make sure I'm not missing something.
He had another severe headache in December. I could have asked at the moment the details of that particular headache, if it created sleep interference or interfere with school attendance, but it's not here and I don't recall the specifics of my interaction that day.
Okay. So that information is not in your medical chart, whether you asked about whether or not his headache back in December was interfering with his sleep, correct?
Listen, my history takes several minutes, so I ask a lot of questions and not everything will be in the report. I just try to put the relevant information that will help the pediatrician understand what happened in my office and why I did, think of a particular diagnosis and I take a medical decision.
But you can't tell me, as we sit here today, whether the headaches Johnathan was having back in December of 2014 were interfering with his sleep.
And that particular detail is not there and I don't recall the conversation.
And you can't tell me whether in January, February, or March, whether the headaches he was apparently having during that period of time were interfering with his sleep. Is that correct?
You could say so.
And you couldn't even tell me whether or not the headaches he was having on April 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, or the 5th, or the 6th, or the 7th were interfering with his sleep. Is that correct?
I want to object. You're being argumentative now. Go ahead and answer that.
I don't recall the specifics of the conversation, but I would have asked Mom, knowing the way I work, what is this thing about not sleeping? If it's last night, or if it's the nights of the last weeks, or if it's the nights of every headache he has.
Okay. But that's not contained anywhere in your medical chart.
Again, I make sure that everything that is abnormal or relevant goes in my report, not everything that is discussed in the room.
We take 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's take a
Okay,
break.
please stand by.
Actually, why don't we take 5, because I have
This,
these.
oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
This marks the end of tape number 1 in the deposition of Sylvia Edelstein, MD. We are going off the record at 11:39.
Remember when you get up to remove the little...
Okay. Here begins tape number 2 in the deposition of Sylvia Edelstein, MD. We are back on the record at 11:51.
All right. I think where we left off is the mom's observations. The other thing she wrote down is that he was having a lot of pain. Did you ask Johnathan or his mother how much pain he was having?
I don't recall the specifics, but that's part of my interrogatory in a patient with headaches. How severe is the headache?
Okay. You can tell me if you could see it somewhere in your note. Do you see where it identifies how bad his pain is?
I wrote, describes a severe headache accompanied of dizziness.
Did you ask whether or not his pain had become any worse compared to the way it may have been a couple of days prior?
I could have, but I don't recall the interaction at this time.
Okay. Would you agree with me that's not documented anywhere in the note?
We can all see what's documented in the note.
I still have to be able to ask you the question. Would you agree with me, though, that that's not in the note?
Well, I'll object. Go ahead and answer if you can.
Right.
Is there a reason why that's not in the note?
Again, I'm going to object again. Go ahead and answer.
Because again, I document the pertinent points, and this is a summary for the pediatrician.
Would it have been important in any of the notes you took to identify whether Johnathan's pain was getting worse, staying the same, or getting better compared to when he first had the headache?
I documented he's not vomiting anymore, so that's a change in his status. So if I didn't comment on the headache, maybe the headache was the same.
Do you have any information that can tell you in your chart or in your memory whether or not his headache pain was getting worse, staying the same, or getting better between when he first had the headache and when you saw him?
Doc, why don't you just read your history again in the typewritten report? 'Cause I think that answers his question for you.
My assessment, I wrote recent severe headache lasting several days.
Okay. But you can't tell me whether it was getting better, staying the same, or getting worse when you saw him?
I'll object. I think she just answered your question.
I see a child who's having a bad headache.
Would it be important to you to know whether the headache pain was getting worse?
It's important, but if you think specifically of a migraine, migraines can get worse, can get better, or stay the same.
But I think, we've already talked about this, at the point that you're gathering this information, you're not necessarily assuming that he's having a migraine at this point, you're just collecting information.
That's correct.
So what I'm trying to figure out from you, though, is did you collect the information from Johnathan or his mother that his headache pain was getting worse when you saw him?
There could have been a million questions that I don't recall at the time, but they're part of my routine questionnaire for a patient with a headache.
Okay. But you can't tell me the answer to that question with looking at your chart or from your memory.
I'll object to the phone. Go ahead.
Hey guys, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but the mic is off at Planet Depot. Can you turn it on?
Me?
Mic's on.
The mic is on. You sure it's not on your end?
You unmute it. I
Why don't you-
can't hear you. If you can hear me.
why don't you lift a little higher? Maybe she can't hear you.
She can't hear anybody.
Oh.
I'm
Should
not
I
putting
adjust
this on
that?
the
Well,
record.
you're
All right, yeah, let's go off the record for a second. Laura, can you hear anybody?
Go for it.
Hello?
So, I don't know if you guys...
We are going back on the record, and the time is 11:57.
All right, doctor. Going through the rest of your note here.
You looking at the handwritten notes still?
Yeah, I'm still on the handwritten notes. Was it your understanding? Let me ask you this. Ultimately, you reached a diagnosis that he was having migraines. Is that correct?
I reached the diagnosis that the episode that motivated the consultation was status migrainosus.
Okay. Now, status migrainosus, that's a special type of migraine, correct?
It's a migraine with a different nature.
What's the distinguishing characteristic that makes it a status migrainosus compared to just an ordinary migraine?
Mostly the duration and the fact that it's very resistant to treatment.
Okay. And typical migraines last 4 to 72 hours, correct?
I'll object to the form of the question. Go ahead.
You could say that that's the definition provided by the American Headache Association.
Okay. Do you follow any sort of headache classification schemes, either by the American Headache Association, or I think there's an International Headache Society classification?
I am aware of those classifications. I basically follow my fund of knowledge, what I learned in my training, and what I acquired as part of my experience.
So by definition, in order for you to reach the diagnosis that a patient is having a migraine, does the patient have to have a certain number of episodes of migraine before you can reach that conclusion?
Nope.
Are you aware of any classification schemes that indicate that a patient has to have a certain number of episodes?
Object to the form and foundation for the question. Go
I
ahead.
can see a patient and have a strong suspicion that the headache is a migraine. It could be the first episode in his life.
Okay. And this is just me testing your knowledge. Are you aware of any headache classification schemes that may indicate that there has to be 5 independent episodes of migraine before you can reach a diagnosis of migraine?
Same objection.
Not always those classifications are practical or they apply fully to what you see in real life. That's very typical in epilepsy, for instance. We try to classify everything as a way to find a common language among doctors, but that doesn't mean that we're gonna proceed in a rigid way like botanists to classify things. You know, people are not plants. They are people and they present with different conditions in different ways.
So what I want you to do is, can you tell me all of the pieces of information that led you to draw the conclusion that Johnathan was having a migraine?
Well, just for the record, when you use the term migraine, are you using the term that she used, status migrainosus, or are you saying something different?
Well, let's just be clear. A status migrainosus is the same thing as a migraine, but which is going longer in time, correct?
She also described that it's also more refractory to treatment. She said both, okay?
Sure. I
So
may
they're
have left
different.
that out. I may have left that out. Okay.
Yes.
All I'm saying is if you use the term migraine, are you using the same term she used in her note, or are you saying something different?
Let's use your term, status migrainosus.
Thanks.
So what are the pieces of information that led you to that conclusion?
From my history taking, the way he presented, with a history of having headaches previously, with the description of the headache, the fact that his neurological examination was normal, the fact that he had a positive family history for migraines, and the fact that he had enough triggers or facilitators for having a severe migraine at the time.
Okay. So I think we've already talked about the history that you gathered from the patient. By the way, do you have an independent recollection of any conversations that you had with Johnathan?
Not specifically, no.
Do you have an independent recollection, aside from the medical chart, of conversations, any conversations you had with Jonathan's mother, Monica Camilla?
No.
The family history, what is your understanding as to the family history of migraines?
That migraines were present in the mother and the grandmother.
Okay. Did the mother write down that she had a history of having migraines?
Her handwriting indicates, my handwriting indicates that there is a maternal grandmother with migraines, but I'm dictating the report a few minutes after the consultation, and you know, sometimes I remember other relatives. That's how in my reports is mother and grandmother.
Okay. So you would agree with me that neither Monica nor yourself wrote down that Monica had a history of having migraines. Is that correct?
I agree with that. It was probably added by memory.
And the maternal grandmother having migraines, did you ask whether she's still having migraines?
That's not a relevant question for me. What I do is I ask the parent about people in the family with headaches. I don't ask migraines. I ask headaches, and I typically say, especially the female relatives, because migraines are sometimes more common in women. They are more common in women.
Does the fact that migraines are more common in women have any impact on whether it would be more or less common in Johnathan, given that he's a male?
No, because the frequency of migraines in children is equal for both genders, and after puberty, it's the females that tend to keep the migraines until menopause, and boys outgrow the migraines.
In the family history.
It's not an absolute thing. There are a lot of men out there with migraines.
Sure. In the family history, in fact, that it looks like Monica wrote down, she doesn't say that she has a history of headaches, does she?
It's not written there, but if I put in my report, it was said in the room.
Wait. Let's be clear. Go to the medical questionnaire, go on the family history, and what did she write?
She write maternal grandmother with migraines,
Right.
and she write headaches.
Wait a minute.
So that prompted me to ask who in the family has headaches.
Hold on a second. Please don't do speaking objections.
It wasn't,
I,
but we
no,
want a
I
clear record.
realize
Come
I
on.
realize you're trying to direct there, but still, it just gets the flow off.
Well, just for the record then, let me make it clear. We want a clear record. Clearly your client in her deposition said she had a history of headaches. We all know it's there. I didn't want her to miss it and have an inaccurate record. That's why I did it.
Well, let's be clear with what the record, and I want to ask her these questions. The record says, under family history, it says what conditions, diseases run in the family.
And the mother
Now,
writes headaches.
Right. Where does it say that she was having headaches?
Well, that will prompt me, because I know the way I work, to ask who in the family has headaches. And if in my report, then you read that it's mom and maternal grandmother, it's because someone said that in the room. I didn't invent it.
So where did you write that mom was having headaches?
In my report, remarkable for mom, maternal grandmother with migraine headaches.
In your typed written report. In your notes that you took, you wrote down maternal grandmother migraines, correct?
Yes.
So, how did you draw the conclusion that the mom was having migraines?
Like I said before, things in my final report to the pediatrician, I sometimes add things that come from my memory. For instance, if you read who lives in the house with this child, I can't understand what the mother wrote, but I added mom and sisters, 16 and 10 years old. So I didn't invent that. I heard it from the mother. And then when I write my final report, says Johnathan has 2 sisters doing fairly in school, and it's not written here. So those are the things that I add from my conversation. My conversation with the families are very prolonged, and I get a lot of information, a lot of questionings. And I also say the sisters are healthy, and you don't see that written. So it's not that I handwrite everything I hear. A lot of things go into my memory, and then if I think they're pertinent, I'm going to put them in the final report.
So how likely is it, assuming that Johnathan's mom and maternal grandmother have a history of migraine headaches, how much more likely does it make it that Johnathan has migraine headaches?
Very likely, because migraines run heavily in families. They're genetic headaches.
Can you give me a percentage?
No.
Beyond saying very likely, is there any way of quantifying it?
It's very likely. Migraines run in families.
You had seen Johnathan in the past for behavioral problems, and you had said in reaching your diagnosis that there were certain triggers that you thought were present for migraines. What triggers were those?
In adolescents, most frequent triggers for having more migraines when they have a migraine diagnosis are sleep disturbances and emotional problems or stress.
Okay. And what were those things that you thought were triggers in this situation for Johnathan?
With Johnathan, I wrote here in my report, he's in 6th grade in a special program for children with emotional disturbances. This is not a child in a regular school. I didn't verify that. I hear that from the mother. He was recently seen by a psychiatrist who recommended Intunif, but I'm not sure if he's taking this medication. So that's my own production. I'm not clear the way the mom is describing, you know, the administration of this medication, if he's really getting it. Mom has no clear understanding of his problems or the interventions that he has received along the way. Johnathan is described as a very moody and irritable teenager with frequent outbursts of yelling for any reasons.
Okay. And based upon your assessment, you believe that those were the possible triggers for his migraine?
They could be.
Okay. Is that one of the things that, it seems like that's one of the things that led you to your conclusion he was having migraines, is that correct?
It's part of it.
Okay. Did you ask when his headaches started in relation to when those events were occurring in his life?
I don't recall the specifics of the conversation in the room, but it's not there, but the mother writes headaches as part of the review of systems, which tells me that it's an ongoing problem for this child.
Do you know when Johnathan's father passed away?
I don't know, and I didn't learn that from the consultation. I typically, when I ask who lives in the house, if mom says me and the children, I don't ask any further questions unless I think it's pertinent.
So you don't know whether that was, in your mind at the time you were assessing him, that wasn't something that played a role as whether it was a possible trigger?
No, I assumed that she was a single mother with children.
How much of a role did your concern about Johnathan's behavioral problems play in your assessment of his condition?
It's just part of it. It sounds like his emotional disturbances are significant. It's not the average amount of emotional issues that a child can have, and but it's just part of it.
And you knew about his behavioral problems because you had seen him back in 2009, so that was something that you were already at least aware of at the time you see him in 2015. Is that correct?
I'm not sure in this moment if at the time I saw Johnathan, I remember the previous consultation, because that would depend on the mother mentioning that she was there before. The mother, any mother could decide that that consultation, how many years prior? 6, 7 years prior was not pertinent, not mention it, and then for me there's no way to know.
Did you go back and look at that prior visit you had with Johnathan?
I had a change in medical records, so it happens that if I'm working with my electronic medical records 2015, I don't have access in the same software to a previous consultation from before 2009, I think I switched, I can't remember.
When you saw Johnathan on April the 8th, 2015, was he cooperative?
Yes.
Was he acting moody?
I don't remember the specifics of the interaction in that room. The mother tells me that he's a moody child, but I am not trying to say that he was moody in the room, because I wrote, Johnathan is described as a very moody and irritable teenager. And he's in a program for children with emotional disturbances. So that doesn't give me the idea that he is like this in the last week. This is a child who's been like this for a long time.
I'm not sure, like I said, I don't speak Spanish, but if you go to page 4 of your handwritten note, under next to mental status, you've got something written. Do you know what that is?
She wrote behavior in
Okay.
Spanish. I mean, they're not supposed to write in that part, because that's my part to judge, abnormalities in the exam that I cannot forget in my formal report. So some parents forget what the guidance they receive from my assistant about how to fill these forms, and they go on and write things there, and quickly they get confused because they don't understand what they're supposed to do, so they stop and they so she got to write behavior.
Is there anything else in this section that is Monica's handwriting?
Nope.
In the section that says completed by physician.
Completed by physician. The weight, it's written by me. Those are my numbers. Vital signs, I wrote good, and constitutional normal.
Okay. And then it's your handwriting further down in the assessment plan follow-up section,
Absolutely.
correct? All right. Was there any part of his developmental milestones or information that you gathered that played any role in your diagnosis?
It's just another contribution that he had severe emotional disturbances, and for a child with migraines, that can work as a facilitator for having a lot of headaches.
Do you think if Johnathan did not present with a history of severe emotional disturbances that you would have been less inclined to believe he was having migraines?
No,
And why is that?
because migraines are a common diagnosis. They're a common disorder, and they can happen in people with emotional disturbances or in people without.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how much of a role did the fact that he was having emotional disturbances play in your diagnosis of migraine for him?
I have to document that problem because it was significant. It's just part of Johnathan.
Okay. Other than what you've told me, did you have any reason to believe that those events occurring in his life and his emotional problems were actually contributing to his headaches?
I'm only aware of what the parent will tell me at the time. I don't know what you refer to.
Do you recall Monica specifically telling you that she believed that his emotional problems were causing him headaches?
I don't recall the specifics of the conversation at the time.
Is that a question you asked her?
Once I know that they're emotional disturbances, that's it. I don't need to know much more. If they're caused by school problems or fights with the family or the death of a parent, I don't know, and it doesn't matter. If the emotional disturbances are there, I know it's a child with emotional problems.
Isn't it important for you to know, though, as a clinician, when the headaches started in relationship to those events?
I don't know what you mean by those
Pardon me?
events. What do you mean by those events?
So, Johnathan was, over a long period of time, having issues with school and other factors in his personal life, which it seems like you were aware of to a certain extent. Is it important for you to know when he developed headaches in relationship to those events occurring in his life?
I'm going to object to the foundation for the question. You can answer.
Not particularly, because migraines can start at any age. I see toddlers with migraines, and migraines can be facilitated by emotional problems. So maybe he would have been a milder case of migraines if he were growing in a happy household without any problems. But I don't know the specifics of his household.
Did you ask Monica whether she was receiving any treatment for migraines?
You mean regularly?
Or any treatment at all?
I don't remember the specifics. We talked, but parents typically use over-the-counter analgesics when the child has a headache.
I'm talking about Monica specifically, her headaches. Did
Her
you
headaches
ask
for
her?
herself?
Right. Did you ask her whether she was taking any medication?
I don't need to.
Do you recall asking her whether she had ever been officially diagnosed by a physician as having migraine headaches?
Most people are not, and I know when they have migraines.
Do you recall Monica specifically using the word migraine in reference to the headaches that she was having?
I don't recall if she used that word specifically, but from the way the mothers or the family describes a headache problem in them or other relatives, I can tell if they're migraines or not.
So what questions did you ask Monica to make the determination that she had a history of migraines?
What I always ask the moms, do you have headaches? And they say yes. Tell me about your headaches, and I let them speak. So when they say, well, I have headaches that are triggered by triggered by changes in the weather, I know they're migraines. If they say I have headaches that accompany my menstrual cycling, I know they're migraines. If they say I have headaches that happen when I'm stressed out, or I didn't sleep well, or I drink coffee, I know they're migraines. I don't need a formal diagnosis coming from another neurologist.
Correct. So what I wanted to know, though, from you is, did you ask Monica how often she was having migraine headaches?
Seriously?
I
mean,
asked
seriously?
enough. If I wrote that
Come on.
mom and maternal grandmother have migraine headaches, it's because I asked this lady, tell me about your headaches and tell me about the headaches in your family.
Okay. Would you agree with me in your medical chart, there is nothing in there that indicates how often Monica's having headaches?
It's not pertinent. The pediatrician doesn't care about that. It doesn't help with the diagnosis. Migraineurs can have migraines once a year, and they're still migraines, and they still have the gene for migraines, and they pass it to their children.
But I guess what I'm asking you, though, is how did you determine she was having migraines?
Okay, don't ask it again. Don't answer it. You've asked her that twice. She's gone through in detail the questions she would have asked. I mean, all these questions about the mother, I don't think are relevant to anything, any issue in this case. I've
Well,
given you a
she's
lot of
saying the
leeway.
history is relevant to her.
And she explained why she believes it's relevant and the information she obtained to get that relevant history. But, you know, the details about mom's headaches are not relevant to this case.
If we're doing speaking objections, she's got to leave the room.
I'm just gonna tell
I'm
her
just
not
gonna-
answer that. Okay.
That's fine, but in
Okay.
the future, I just would appreciate the courtesy that if you're going to have speaking objections, can we please just ask the witness to leave the room?
No, we've been here for 2.5 hours now. Let's go.
All right, doctor. In your social history section, it indicates that. I'm sorry. Let's skip over that.
You look about the handwritten note again?
Yeah, we're still on the handwritten note. In your assessment plan follow-up.
One more thing, the mother also writes in her handwriting that he's moody in the social part.
Right, which is melangio or melangino.
Mal genio means bad mood.
Okay, there you go. I don't speak Spanish. In the assessment plan follow-up, you indicate that he's got a recent severe headache lasting several days.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've determined that means 4 days. Is that correct?
Yes.
And he's being treated with OTC, that's over-the-counter medication.
No. When I write that means that I spend the time with the parent talking about the proper use of over-the-counter analgesics, because sometimes that's not understood properly by the parent.
Okay.
What is the right dosing, how to alternate them, how to use them properly. There's no other way to say it. So when I write OTC means that I spend a certain amount of time explaining to the parent what is the rational use of over-the-counter analgesics to provide relief. Because when it's done properly, the migraine resolves, the status migrainosus resolves, and then we can move on.
So what was your understanding as to the kind of medication that Johnathan had been taking at the time that he saw you on April the 8th, 2015?
Over-the-counter analgesics.
Okay. Do you know what kinds of medications?
Whatever was given by the ear doctors and whatever mom was given. And I think I specified Tylenol and Motrin.
And would you agree with me that those medications were not helping to alleviate his pain?
Well, most of the times I discover that they're not used properly. The parents they're not clear about the exact dosing, how often they can repeat it, that they can overlap them. Those are things that I clarify.
Did you have the belief that Monica was not giving him the proper medication?
That's not what I said.
Did you have the belief that she was not giving him the right dose of medication?
That's not what I said.
Okay. Please explain to me what you say. I guess I'm confused on it. What is it about the medication Monica was giving to him that you believe maybe was
Again, I don't
not
recall
proper?
the specifics of my conversation, but I said I often, very often discover that the parents don't have a clear notion of how to use the over-the-counter analgesics, which sounds obvious, but it has some peculiarities, and that's so I explain what is the right dose according to the weight of the child, how often they can repeat the same one, how to alternate them, and that is a conversation.
So I understand it's a conversation. What I'm trying to find out from you is, did you have some sort of belief at the time that you had this conversation with Monica that she was in any way improperly medicating her child?
It's nothing accusatory against the parent, and I don't recall the specifics. So I will have this explanation. I will give this explanation to every parent, because I will not assume what they know or what they don't know or what they do properly or improperly.
Okay. So I understand that you may give this instruction to every parent. But what I'm trying to figure out, though, from you is, did you have any reason to believe that for any reason Johnathan was not getting either the proper medication or the proper dose of the medication from the mom?
Beyond what she's already told you, right? Because she's not going to repeat what she's already said. Anything beyond what you've already said.
I don't know what else to add.
At the time that you had this conversation with Monica, do you believe that she was giving her son medication for his headaches?
I wrote here, Mom has been giving Motrin and Tylenol with partial relief. And that means that he was getting some relief from that, but the headache was continuing.
At the time that you had this conversation, did you have any reason to believe that Monica was not giving him the medication at the proper dosage?
I'm going to object to the form of the
I'm
question.
not going to
Go ahead.
interrogate the parents to make sure that they're doing things right, because I assume that they didn't go to medical school. So I explain things, so whatever they were doing right, they will understand that there's a different way to do it and try to be more efficacious.
I want to be clear on this, because I don't want you to come into court and say that you believe that the parent, Monica, was doing something wrong about the kind of medication she was giving Johnathan. So if you have a belief that that was happening, I want to know the reason why you hold that belief.
She's already told you she's not saying that.
I don't know why you're saying that. I don't assume that any parent is doing anything wrong, and they might be doing things wrong just because they don't know clearly how to do things, because they don't go to medical school. So instead of wasting time asking them, how do you give the Tylenol, what dose, I just sit down and say, when you give Tylenol, you give it this way, all the different options, the right dosing, and how to use them. So we don't confuse anybody, because then if not, the parent gets confused with what they think is right and what I'm saying. So we talk about one thing, how to do things in a way that it's aggressive in the good way and proper.
So at the time that you had this conversation, did you ask Monica any details about the kind of medication and how often she was giving it?
I don't recall the specific conversation, but I put in my note, Mom has been giving Tylenol and Motrin.
Okay. Based upon whatever information she said in response to you, do you have any reason to believe that that was the improper kind of medication or dose of medication?
No. In fact, in the first page, I write that she's been given Tylenol and Motrin. And I even clarified that I ask how much Motrin you give every time you give Motrin, and she says 400 milligrams. And that's a bit on the low dose. So I clarify things like that. I make the calculation per weight, make sure, because the right way to treat a headache is to use the proper use of Tylenol and Motrin, not a little bit.
As we sit here today, do you have any criticisms about anything that Johnathan's mom, Monica Camella, did for her child at the time that you were seeing him on April the 8th, 2015?
I don't recall the specifics, but I try not to be judgmental of any parent. I don't ever think that the parent is trying to do things wrong, so why would I think that she was wrong in what she was doing in the bad way? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm just asking whether you were critical of anything that she was doing.
I'm not critical of any parent. I just try to educate and help the child.
Okay. You're responding to my question in a way that it's referring to every parent, but I'm just asking about Monica. Are you critical about anything that she was doing?
If I'm not critical of any parent, well, I'm going to be critical of Mrs. Valladares.
Okay. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but am I safe to say that you are not critical of anything she was doing?
No, the parents can do things that need to be done in a different way, but that doesn't reflect badly on them. It's not a negative thing. I just give suggestions that could be more efficacious than what they've been doing.
Your note goes on to say that you prescribed Zoloft. Why did you prescribe Zoloft?
Because the other approach in the treatment of a status migrainosus or the patient with migraines with a certain frequency, a frequency that warrants prophylactic treatment, is to prescribe a medication that the patient will take every day until the frequency of the headache decreases. And sertraline or Zoloft is not the most typical thing, but I chose that medication for Johnathan because of a history of severe emotional disturbances. So I thought that they had an impact of certain magnitude in his headaches, and it could be helpful.
And then you also write CT scan, if not better, and then you've got some scribble and it says a week. Am I interpreting that correctly?
That's what I wrote.
Okay, so if he's not better, you're saying that he needs to have a CT scan in a week?
Yeah.
Okay. So why did you write that?
Because it's my way to explain to the pediatrician that I'm not going to wait a long time, and if it's not better in a few days, I'm going to get imaging. And in fact, the mother walked away with an order to get imaging, and that means that she was also advised to call me in a day or two to tell me how things were going. And it may happen that if the mother calls me in 2 days and she is very alarmed or something, I can tell her, well, you have the order, go and get the imaging.
At the time that you wrote the order for the CT scan, I know that your diagnosis was status migrainosus. Was there anything else in your differential diagnosis at that point in time?
That was my diagnosis based on all the information I had retrieved, from the history taken, the physical exam, the family history, etc. But the fact that I gave an order for the imaging tells me that I want to consider other possibilities too, because we don't do CAT scans or any kind of imaging for status migrainosus. Per se, you don't need it. The brain is normal. Correct.
So what were those other things that you were considering?
Well, I didn't want to miss the remote possibility of a tumor, which is an exceedingly rare pathology in children, but I cannot miss it.
Is that the only other thing that you were considering?
Probably yes.
So the only reason that you ordered the CT scan is because of the remote possibility he might have a tumor?
Oh, there's no history of trauma, so there's no reason for me to think that he is bleeding from trauma or has a fracture in the head, and that there are no signs of infection to think that he could have meningitis. There are no meningisms. There's no fever, no photophobia. So that's why I was narrowing my concerns for a brain tumor, which is exceedingly rare but not impossible.
Would you agree with me that a tumor could have the same symptoms that Johnathan presented with when he came to you on April the 8th, 2015?
It would have been
One second, I'm objecting to the form and foundation for the question. Go ahead.
It would have been an exceedingly rare presentation.
How rare?
Very rare.
Even though it's rare, it could potentially be life-threatening, correct?
You could say so, but it's, tumors are in children the most common ones are typically benign of slow growth, but because they can go undetected for a long period of time, they can present when they are in a large size They're still very rare.
But at this point, you don't know whether it's slow growing or it's large or it's
I don't know
compressing
anything.
anything, correct?
Right?
And meningitis could also produce the kind of symptoms that Johnathan presented with on April the 8th, 2015, is that correct?
I'm object to the form and foundation for the question. Go ahead.
I don't agree because we already said that his physical exam was not consistent with the diagnosis of meningitis. A 12-year-old will give enough signs of a meningitis, different than a 12-month-old.
But you would agree with me that you don't necessarily have to have focal neurological deficits in order to have meningitis, correct?
Same objection. Go ahead.
He doesn't have photophobia, which is a pretty consistent sign of meningitis. And children with meningitis, even viral meningitis, which are not fatal, and everybody survives that. Children are sick. They are like they're not happy. They're screaming in pain. They can be confused many times, and that's not the way Johnathan looked to me from my note.
Are you aware that 2 days earlier when Johnathan went to his pediatrician that he had photophobia?
I was not aware.
If you had known about that, would that have changed the orders that you had in this case?
And everything else is the same during her assessment and
Correct.
same during her history?
Sure.
Well, I would object. Go ahead.
Every migrainer can have photophobia. It's a very common sign. You know, you probably know someone in your family who says that when they have a headache, they have sensitivity to light and sound.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but photophobia could also be a meningeal sign, correct?
Yes.
And I'm not sure if I got an answer to this question, but you could have a patient who has headaches just like Johnathan, who has meningitis, correct?
She's answered that already. She's not going to answer it again. Ask the next question. She's already discussed meningitis at length now. She's not doing it again.
Could a patient such as Johnathan, who presented on April the 8th, 2015, also have encephalitis?
No, because a symptom of encephalitis is interference with mentation. And his mentation was clear.
Do you always have to have interference with mentation in order to have encephalitis?
It's part of the criteria.
Johnathan could have had hydrocephalus on April the 8th, 2015 when you saw him, isn't that correct?
Same objection. Go ahead.
Could have had brain malaria, but you know, I can't. Why would he have hydrocephalus? And I don't even know how to understand the question.
Does hydrocephalus cause headaches like the ones Johnathan presented with on April the 8th, 2015?
Can cause headaches.
Like the ones Johnathan was having on April the 8th?
Maybe could present with severe headaches, but the exam would be different.
But the exam could also be the same, correct?
Nope.
Why is that?
Because in hydrocephalus there's pressure on the brain, and the optic nerves would show an abnormality that he didn't have.
Which optic nerves?
The two optic nerves that he has.
So what would you see if you were looking at his optic nerves and you had hydrocephalus?
Swelling.
And that's always visible for patients with hydrocephalus?
It's always. I guess so. With a certain degree of hydrocephalus, they will cause optic nerve swelling or papilledema.
Could an intracranial bleed cause the kind of headaches that Johnathan presented with on April the 8th, 2015?
And everything else the same. Same history, same exam, right?
Same history, same exam.
I'll object. Go ahead.
You could say it's possible, but you know, the diagnostic algorithm doesn't work like that.
And an intracranial bleed could possibly be life-threatening, is that correct?
That is correct.
And an intracranial bleed could be diagnosed by a CT scan, is that correct?
I'll object.
Not always, but very likely.
CT scans are sensitive for diagnosing intracranial bleeds, correct?
That's correct.
I think the statistics are, greater than 98% sensitive, is that correct?
It's possible. You can miss a very small bleed, but they're highly sensitive, and that's why it's imaging of choice in an emergency room for doctors who see trauma and problems of the kind.
Does it matter whether it's a CT scan with or without contrast?
Doesn't matter.
An aneurysm could also cause the kind of headaches that Johnathan presented with on April the 8th, 2015. Is that correct?
And I'll object. Go ahead.
I'm not sure. I don't have enough experience because it's exceedingly rare in the pediatric population, and I haven't seen it before.
Have you, in your practice, ever treated a patient with aneurysm before?
No.
Have you, in your practice, ever treated a patient with intracranial bleeds before?
From trauma.
Do you know the intracranial bleeds that you've seen before from trauma, are those subarachnoid, subdural?
Or both.
Or both, okay. Those patients that you've seen before who had bleeds from trauma, were those patients that you were seeing as part of your office practice, or is this going back to when you may have been doing rotations as in part of a hospital?
Both.
So you've sent patients for CT scans before that you've had walk into your office and you thought they had signs and symptoms which were suspicious for intracranial bleed?
Yes, and sometimes they don't even walk into my office.
Okay. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, 2 weeks ago, a patient of mine with epilepsy, a 12-year-old, the mother called me saying that he was skateboarding without a helmet and he fell. And he was having more seizures than usual. I sent him to the emergency room and he had a bleed. He went to Children's Hospital and the neurosurgeons had to drain the bleed. And it was both subarachnoid and epidural.
Does a patient with an intracranial hemorrhage have to have focal neurological deficits?
Say that one more time.
I'm sorry, maybe I phrased it wrong. Does a patient with intracranial hemorrhage have focal neurological deficits all the time?
It's
Hold on a second. I'm object to the hypothetical patient you're talking about without any additional information. I think it's an unfair question. Go ahead and answer if you can.
It's a broad and vague question because the bleed can be of any magnitude, different locations, so that will determine the examination.
But you would agree with me that a smaller bleed may not cause focal neurological deficits, is that correct?
Same objection. Incomplete hypothetical. Go ahead and answer if you can.
I guess it's possible.
Have you ever heard of the term a sentinel bleed?
No, it's not something that I think I heard it, but it's not a term that we use in my specialty.
Is it because by definition any bleed is considered to be an intracranial bleed?
By definition? What definition are you using?
I'm not trying to be difficult. It's just my understanding is there are some publications out there that don't call it a sentinel bleed because they consider any bleed at all to be, by definition, an intracranial bleed.
So
what is the question?
Yeah.
My question is that your definition as well? Is that why you don't use the term sentinel bleed, because you just consider any bleed to be intracranial?
Well, I'm going to object. She already said it's not a term she uses in her profession, so I don't know that she has a definition.
It happens in medicine that people come out with names for things, and it doesn't work like that. Like occupational therapists tell the parents of children with autism that they have sensory processing disorder because autism is a harsh word. But then, it's just confusing. So you cannot give names to things. I don't know what's a sentinel bleed. because that's not a term that we use in child neurology, and I don't know if it's used in neurology at all, because I'm not familiar with that term.
I'm assuming you're aware that aneurysms can have minor bleeds before rupture. Is that correct?
Object, go ahead.
It's correct.
Okay, and I'm assuming you're also aware that that could cause headaches.
Object again, go ahead.
You could say so, yes.
Okay, and I'm assuming you're also aware that in association with those headaches, there's also often neck pain.
Same objection, go ahead.
Well, blood, when it's out of the blood vessels in the brain, can cause irritation, and that can lead to the stiffness of the neck, or the neck rigidity.
Okay. Do you know anything about the how common it is for small bleeds from aneurysms to cause pain in the occipital area of the head?
I'll object to the form of the question and suggest that it is common. Go ahead and answer if you can.
I never encountered a patient with an aneurysm in my practice in all these years, seeing children with neurological problems. So I'm not too clear how to answer your question. Again, anybody can have an aneurysm. They're exceedingly rare, and they will have a tendency to bleed or explode, if ever, in the elderly years when the blood vessels are thickened and they become weak. But it's exceedingly rare in the pediatric population.
Did you ask Johnathan's mother whether anybody in her family has a history of vascular malformations?
If I'm going to mention vascular malformations, I'm going to have to include 30 other things that are more common than that. So my interrogatories typically for this lady and every mother, because I don't remember the specifics, it will be any person in the family with any type of neurological disorder, seizures, epilepsy, and I make a small list. And I've heard parents talking about brain tumors or epilepsy. I don't go into specifics, because if I want to go into specifics, I will list things that are way more common than arteriovenous malformations.
So I'm gleaning from that, there was a long answer to my question, but it sounds like you did not ask her anything about
Specifically?
vascular malformations.
I don't recall.
If you had asked her that information, I'm assuming that would have found its way into the medical chart. Is that correct?
I would object again, go ahead.
You could say that.
Is there anything about your medical chart that you believe is inaccurate or missing?
Again, my report is a bullet, it's a condensation of the information just to inform the pediatrician what happened in the room and what is the plan.
I'm not sure that answers my question. Is there anything about your medical report that you believe is inaccurate or missing?
I think she answered your question. You don't have to do it again. Ask your next question, please.
You're instructing her?
Yeah, I am, because you know what, we're 3 hours into this. She's giving you the answers to your questions. You don't like the answers, doesn't mean you get to ask it again. So just ask another question.
Okay. Doctor, when you said that you had the conversation with Monica about the CT scan, you said it should be performed in a week in your written note, but in your typed written note, it says a few days. Do you remember what you specifically told Monica?
Object to the foundation for the question. I don't think it's accurate. Go ahead and answer.
I don't remember the specifics or the conversation that I had with Johnathan's mother to the word, but I can tell you from the way I work, I gave an order to the mom, and I don't give an order for imaging to every mom at all, but I gave an order to this mom for imaging of the head, and the instructions were, because this is the way I work, in this setting, I would have done the same today and at the time. Call me in a day or two if things are not better. And here is the order for imaging of the head, so we can do it anytime we decide on the phone that we need to do it. You don't have to come back here. I don't have to. And I gave an order for Children's Hospital because I faxed it to them. They helped me with the authorization, and by the time the patients or the families call, they can take them right away.
So I don't think you're answering my question, but what I'd like to know is what you specifically told the mom with respect to how long she should wait before getting the CT scan.
She literally just answered that question. She said, call me back within a few days, and then we'll discuss it. That's exactly what she
And I would say
said.
that most typically will tell the parent, call me in a day or two if things are not better.
Okay.
Because that's the way I typically
So you said a
tell.
few days, a day or two. Those are two different things. Do you remember what you specifically told her?
Nope.
Do you know why it is in your handwritten note it says a week?
I don't think it says a week, so I'm going to object. Go ahead.
Turn to page 4 of your handwritten note.
Yeah, but you see the little sign in front of it? I think if you ask her, she'll tell you that says in about a week. That's
That's why I'm asking her. She's the witness, not you.
I think she said it earlier. I'm trying to be nice. Go ahead.
Again, I don't recall what words were exchanged in that room that time. That was, 3-4 years ago. But I can tell you that in the same setting, if you're the parent of this child, I would tell you, call me in a day or two if things are not better. Here is the order for imaging of the head. If we decide that we need to do it, you have it already, and you can go and get it. We'll decide that when talking over the phone.
Did you tell Monica anything else about any sort of risks with any sort of delays in getting the CT scan?
Check to the form of the question. Go ahead.
I don't recall the specifics of the conversation, but if I tell that to a parent, they're going to go running and get the CT scan because I'm contradicting myself. I'm telling, here is the order for imaging if things don't get better soon. But if you don't get the imaging, terrible things can happen. It doesn't work like that. I cannot confuse a parent with such message.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but what I'm hearing is that you don't remember what you said to her. Is that correct?
I'm just saying what I tell every parent.
Okay. Do you specifically remember anything that you said to Monica about the risk of delaying and getting the CT scan done?
Check to form. Go ahead.
I don't remember the specifics of my talking with Mrs. Monica, but it doesn't sound like something I would tell to a parent.
Okay.
Because every parent naturally will go running to get the imaging, which has risks on its own. So that's why we have to be cautious and decide when is the proper time to do the CAT scan.
Did you tell Monica anything about your concerns for why you may want the CT scan?
Nope.
Why not?
I don't remember what I said to her, but I'm not going to tell a parent we're going to do a CT scan to make sure he doesn't have a brain tumor, because if not, every parent will panic and go running to get a CAT scan, and it would be an unnecessary intervention in the big majority of the cases.
Okay, so correct. I just want to make sure I'm correct on this point. It sounds to me like you did not say anything to Monica about your concerns about a possible tumor. Is that correct?
Right. I don't remember what I talked to her, but I'm not going to tell an average parent, in that setting, I want to make sure that we don't have a tumor here, because it's not the proper way to share the information you have.
Did you have any discussion with Monica about any other alternatives to getting the CT scan?
I don't understand your question.
So, for instance, any other treatment other than having a CT scan performed?
Check to the form and foundation for the question. Go ahead.
I was expecting to catch up with this family a couple of days later, see how things were going, and go from there. I
Okay.
have to give my list of recommendations a chance to be implemented and work.
I just want to be clear on this. So your instructions to Monica were that you wanted to hear back from her within a couple of days?
That's what I would tell every parent in a status migrainosus.
Okay. I'm looking at your note. Where does it say that?
Doesn't say.
Okay. Is there a reason why it doesn't say that?
Because at the moment I was holding my dictaphone and I didn't say it, but it's the way I deal with status migrainosus.
What did you provide Monica any sort of material that would tell her that she should call you back in 1 or 2 days or a few days in order to report Johnathan's status?
I tell the parents these things, and I also write in a piece of paper while I'm explaining things. I write them down, but that's a piece of paper that she would have. It's not part of my medical chart.
Okay.
In fact, Mom for sure has a piece of paper where I wrote the right dose of all the over-the-counter analgesics, how to use the Zoloft, other recommendations, and I usually write, call me in a day or two if things are not better.
So what you're telling me is that there is a note with medication dosages on it and also a time frame for Monica to call you back, and that's not in your medical chart.
It's never part of my medical record because the parents will go home with it. So she should have it.
When did you give this to Monica in your meeting with her?
I give it to every single parent in my office.
Is this a note which is written on some sort of letterhead or
Yes.
script form?
It's a white paper with my letterhead, and as I am explaining things, I'm writing down, and the parents take that paper home.
Is there a reason why you don't keep copies of these?
No, I don't. They don't serve me in any way.
All right. Did you have any discussion with Monica about the risks of having a CT scan as far as any sort of exposure to radiation?
I don't recall doing that, but that's always a concern I have. I try to be very judicious if I order a CAT scan.
Okay. So from what I'm hearing is you don't recall doing that, but it's a concern that you have.
I always think, well, if it's appropriate to get a CAT scan in a child.
Okay. But as we sit here today, you can't tell me whether you actually had that conversation with Monica.
I don't remember what I talked word by word.
Did you have a conversation with Monica where you told her about the status migrainosus?
I had a long conversation with his mother. This probably represents a status migrainosus. I explained the basis of pain management with over-the-counter, alternating the use of different ones at the right dose for weight. At the same time, I advised preventive treatment with Zoloft, which may also help with his mood swings and excessive irritability.
Would you agree with me that you did not have any conversation with Monica about anything else that could be causing Johnathan's headaches?
Object to the form of the question.
Thinking of the way I work, probably not, because I don't typically tell a parent there's a small possibility that he has a brain tumor. I mean, it's not what I do.
And I'm assuming, based upon your prior answers, that you did not have any conversation with Monica about the possibility that a CT scan might show something that could be important to Johnathan's diagnosis.
Object to the form of the question and foundation for the question. Go ahead.
It wouldn't make any sense that I say so. If not, the parent will run and get the CT scan within an hour.
Okay. It sounds to me like a common theme here is you didn't want Monica to go running at a CT scan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because our plan was to give my list of recommendations a chance to work based on my diagnosis of status migrainosus, and if things were not better in a day or two or within a few days, I would get the CAT scan. And she had the order for that.
Let's just say hypothetically he had a tumor. The CT scan could have possibly saved his life if he had had it done in a prompt manner, correct?
No,
Why is that?
because tumors are not an emergency truly. It's important to identify them, and but it's not an emergency. I've seen patients in my practice that I know they have a brain tumor because of the findings in the physical exam, and I still give them imaging, and we plan imaging like a sophisticated MRI with contrast and everything, because I know that a week or two it's not going to make any difference at all. And many times I observe that the brain tumor is diagnosed, and it takes maybe a month for the patient to be operated on, because the neurosurgeons are planning things and are, deciding what is the right time, but it's never done on emergency basis.
Is an intracranial hemorrhage an emergency?
Object to the form and the inadequate foundation for the hypothetical question and the hypothetical patient and the hypothetical intracranial bleed. Go ahead.
So I guess that's a general question?
Yes.
Yes, you could say yes.
And let's just say hypothetically Johnathan did have a intracranial hemorrhage as of April the 8th, 2015. Would you agree with me that a CT scan likely would have identified it on that day?
I'm going to object to the form of the question. She's not going to offer any opinions about this at trial.
I don't know.
Do you know anything about how brain aneurysms are treated?
Again, she's not going to talk about this at trial, just so you know.
This is the field of neurosurgery.
Okay. I'm just, part of this is just limiting what you know. Do you intend to offer any opinions in this case about any of the treatment that Johnathan had for the aneurysm he had?
I don't know what the treatment what's the treatment that he received.
Have you reviewed any of the medical records from Children's National Medical Center?
No.
And other than your own medical chart, I'm assuming you've not seen any of the other medical records from either International Pediatrics or any of the ER visits he had at Shady Grove Hospital?
No. Maybe Mom had papers from the emergency room. Oftentimes they have discharge recommendations, but I don't recall.
I'm assuming, since it's not part of your medical chart, that the mom did not give you any sort of paperwork from any of the hospitals?
Right. Because I would have kept it. But sometimes it's enough that they show it and I take the information that it's relevant for me.
Do you have any recollection of Monica showing you any paperwork from any hospitals?
No.
Are you aware that Johnathan saw his pediatrician on April the 2nd and she immediately sent him to the hospital at Shady Grove?
If it's not in her note, the only way she'd be aware of such information is if it came from me, so it'd be subject to the attorney-client privilege, so she's not going to talk about it. Okay?
All right.
Yes.
Well, let me ask the question, and I don't want to know anything that your attorney told you, okay? What I just want to know is information that you know either from memory or from your medical chart.
Right.
Were you aware of that at the time that you saw Johnathan on April the 8th?
I don't recall the particulars of my conversation with Mom during my office visit, the visit at my office, but he was referred by a pediatrician, and and according to my note, he was seen at the emergency room twice, so I was aware that he was seen before.
Okay. Were you aware of the number of times that Monica brought Johnathan to the pediatrician between April the 2nd and April the 8th, 2015?
Possibly not. It's not in my note. I just talked about 2 visits to the emergency room.
Did you at any point contemplate reaching out to the pediatrician to find out why it is they were concerned enough to send Johnathan to the emergency room?
I put together my report and send it to the pediatrician. That's the way we communicate.
Okay. Is there a reason why you didn't consider reaching out to the pediatrician to find out more information about why they thought Johnathan should go to the emergency room?
Object to the form of the question and the foundation for the question. Go ahead.
I see a status migrainosus 4 times a week, and it's not uncommon that the patients were seen at the emergency room, either because the pediatrician sent them or because they decided to go on their own.
I'm talking about before you reached your diagnosis and you're collecting information. So at this point, you're just trying to find out about his history. When you're collecting that information, did you consider reaching out to the pediatrician to find out why it is that Johnathan was being sent to the emergency room?
And while she's taking the history from the parent?
Right.
So stop taking the history from Ms.
No,
Valadares and
I'm
call the
talking-
pediatrician?
I'm talking about when you're gathering your information.
If you understand the question, go ahead. I don't.
I
Go
don't
ahead.
understand the question, truly.
Okay. You would agree with me, you never reached out to the pediatrician to find out anything about Jonathan's condition with respect to the headaches he was having or why he was being sent to the emergency room. Is that correct?
Object to the form of the question. Go ahead and answer.
It doesn't really matter. The moment he was seen at the emergency room, there were doctors there doing an evaluation, implementing a treatment.
Doc, let me stop you.
Yeah.
All he wants to know is, did you call the pediatrician?
No,
Okay.
but I
And-
did communicate with the pediatrician with my report.
Right.
I understand. You would agree with me that you also did not reach out to any of the ER physicians that saw Johnathan at Shady Grove to find out anything about their assessment of Johnathan when they saw him on prior days. Is that correct?
Same objection. Go ahead.
It's not the way it works. I can call the emergency room and new doctors are there because it's a different shift. How am I going to know? The parents don't know the name of the doctor seeing them.
But you could call the hospital and find out which doctor had seen him, correct?
Yes, the ER doctors are busy in saving lives, so they don't have the time to pick up the phone and talk about all the patients they saw recently, and it would be very natural that they don't even remember the particulars. It doesn't work like that.
You've never called a hospital for a patient to ask information about the patient's condition prior to seeing the patient?
Not that I can recall.
Physicians at the hospital, I'm assuming though, based upon your knowledge, that they would have access to the patient's medical chart from when they saw the patient, correct?
They could.
Okay, so they could go back and they could look at what they saw and what they found when they saw the patient on prior days, correct?
Okay, now you're arguing with the witness, and 3.5 hours into the deposition, I'm going to stop this. She's not answering these questions, so just move on to something that's actually relevant. She didn't call and speak with the ER physicians. That's factual. That's what you have.
One more thing.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. You're going to answer the next question. Hopefully it's relevant.
Do you know how long it takes for a CT scan result to come back once a CT scan is performed?
In what setting? In any setting? In the
If you sent-
emergency room?
If you sent a
or-
patient to the emergency room.
CT scan is completed in a few minutes, 10-15 minutes, and the interpretation is done on the spot and communicated to the ER doctor.
Are you aware that the pediatrician that saw Johnathan the first time had actually diagnosed that Johnathan was having problems moving his neck?
I was not aware of that.
Would that have been important information for you?
She's already answered that question. She's not going to do it again. You've asked her questions previously about his photophobia and the neck discomfort.
All right, let me take a 5-minute break, and I think I might be close to wrapping up.
Okay, please stand by. We are going off the record. The time is
Can I ask you, did people go beyond 2?
1:08.
No, I think we're getting real close here.
Okay, we are going back on the record. The time on the video monitor is 1:17.
All right, doctor, some quick follow-up questions here. What do you consider the correct dosing for a migraine in a pediatric patient like Johnathan?
Dosing of what?
Medications to treat his headache.
Analgesics?
Sure.
For the over-the-counter analgesics, Tylenol is 15 milligrams per kilo every 4 to 6 hours. And Motrin, ibuprofen, or Advil is 10 milligrams per kilo every 6 hours. Excedrin migraine is dose per kilo 2 in a similar way to Motrin every 6 hours.
And how soon after your examination of Johnathan did you actually write your report, the written report?
I think she dictated it.
I'm sorry, dictated.
I don't recall. I usually do it same day or the next day, but I don't remember. There's no
Okay.
way for me to know that.
And I know that there was that referral slip for the, the order form for the CT scan. I may have misheard you on this, but did you actually send a copy of that over to Children's ahead of time?
I fax it. The moment I write an order for imaging, we make a photocopy in our office and we fax it to Children's Hospital right away.
Okay. Do you have any confirmation of that fax being sent?
I don't need it and I don't get it.
Okay, so you don't keep anything like that in your office?
No.
Okay. But it's your understanding it would have been sent that day, is that
Yes.
correct? All right. How long after you dictated your report did you send it to the pediatrician?
I don't recall.
Do you have a custom and practice to do within a certain time frame?
I do it within a reasonable time. Could be the same day, could be longer than that.
And how long have you been working? I know you've received referrals before from International Pediatrics, but you know how long you've been receiving referrals from International Pediatrics?
I don't recall.
Do they ever call you on the phone to discuss patient's care?
It could have happened.
But they never called you on the phone in this case to discuss Johnathan's care with you, is that correct?
Not that I recall.
Did they call you at any point after everyone learned of what had happened to Johnathan?
I don't remember how I learned about it.
I just want to be clear on this. So as we sit here today, you don't remember any conversations you had with any other healthcare providers regarding Johnathan's condition, is that correct?
Right.
The note that you made reference to with respect to the dosing and that Monica should call you back in a couple of days, do you know what else was written on that note besides that information?
I don't recall.
Would you have written anything, you believe, based on your custom and practice besides those two pieces of information?
It is my custom as I speak to the parents and give them a plan to write down things because oftentimes it helps them, you know, with memory of instructions given.
I don't want other patients' medical information, but can you give me a copy of the paper with, I guess, your letterhead or something on it that you typically give patients when you write this information down for them?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. If you could provide that to your attorney so you can provide it to me, that'd be great.
Yeah, just like a blank form or something?
Yeah, I'm assuming you've got something that actually
It's
has...
a blank page.
Right,
Blank
it's
page.
got your letterhead or something on it. Okay.
Sure.
All right. When you got the news that Johnathan was in critical condition at Children's at some point in time, did you have any recollection of him at that point after you heard that news?
Well, I'm going to object. I'm not sure when she learned about the events of Johnathan, so I don't know that that's a fair question, but go ahead.
I learned about Johnathan way after his passing.
Okay, so you remember learning about him after he passed?
Yes.
Do you remember anybody telling you why he passed?
I believe that it was someone from Children's Hospital, and I learned that he had this bleed and he passed away, but I never had access to the records like imaging or anything.
Sorry about that.
Mhm.
As we sit here today, I know you don't remember conversations you have with Johnathan. Do you even remember what Johnathan looked like?
No.
I think those are all the questions I have.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
No questions.
No question.
None. We will read and sign for the record, and we're done, okay?
Okay, all right, please stand by.
I know you gotta go.
Thank you, Doc.
You can
This marks the end of the deposition.
I want you to take
Sylvia
your
Ellis
original
Lee
chart with you and hold on
You're
to it.
going
I
on
wanna
the
take it,
record
okay.
at 1:23.
Yep, please do.
Okay.
All right.
So here's your,
Okay, one, just